Chapter 1294. Published at 12th of October, 2022, 12:27 and 55 seconds p.m. Chapter 1294. Not good enough if audio player doesn't work. Press stop then play button again. Chapter 1294. Not good enough. Lionel internally felt relieved. The drain to his normal stamina was minimal, but using his king's might like that left him feeling like his mind was being squeezed dry. It wasn't a joke to use his dream force and will to forcefully expand the influence of his internal sight, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep it up without it affecting the rest of his performance. Not long after experiencing this feeling, though, Lionel steeled himself. The truth was that he had no idea what was up ahead. Breathing sighs of relief now would make him sloppy. He had to prepare for every possibility. That's not like me. Lionel frowned, his mind suddenly going on high alert. He never relaxed before getting to his goal like that, but he had almost done so just now. The moment Lionel's mind sharpened, he honed in on his surroundings, soon finding that the violet of his king's might had flecks of an abnormal pink within them. Without the slightest hesitation, his will clamped down, roaring out like a dragon and shattering the odd pink discolorations. Someone targeted me? What about? Lionel's internal sight reached out to everyone in his group. They all had light smiles on their faces, and their bodies were relaxed. There was nothing odd about this on the surface. After all, after Lionel took the brunt of the burden away from them, they had been able to replenish their force at a faster rate, and their previous helplessness was all but washed away. However, there were too many oddities. For one, Elther would definitely not be smiling right now. In fact, he should be pissed. Knowing him, he would want to fight, not rely on Lionel. But he would also understand that he didn't have the strength to insist on this, so he would be infuriated with himself. Then there was Arnold and Noah. These two were as stoic as they came. Lionel had yet to see something so benign leave them in a state of perpetual happiness like this. This chapter upload first at NovelBin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. Beyond this, there was the likes of Richard, who was forced to be in a group with Lionel to begin with. He knew that if he tried to leave on his own, not only would it be a question of whether he even had the strength to survive, but it would also be a question of if it would be Lionel or the surrounding danger that would kill him first. He didn't dare to leave because he knew that Lionel would target him in the future. Even if he somehow survived, by then he wouldn't even be able to take a single step forward in this place. Even one of these individuals lightly smiling like this would have been an oddity, but the idea of all of them doing so was simply ridiculous on its face. Again. Lionel's brow furrowed deeply when his senses focused on Yuri. She was smiling just like everyone else, but Lionel could tell that it was fake. It didn't travel up to her eyes, which continuously darted back and forth as though looking for something. What was most shocking was that Yuri's pupils, by Lionel's estimation, were focusing on regions dozens of meters away despite the dense fog. So it was either she had an ability like Lionel's snowy star owl eyes, or her internal sight can lock onto regions that far away? But then why would she bother moving her eyes at all? Wouldn't that just be giving her away? Unless she wanted to give herself away by now. Yuri would have already noticed Lionel's scrutiny, but she didn't even look toward him even after several seconds. Lionel shook his head. Don't you think there should be some exceptions, even when you don't want to talk to someone? This is a life and death situation. It isn't time to be tsundere. Huh? Lionel suddenly let out a low shout that almost sounded like an acute clap of thunder. Lacing his king's might with his shout, Lionel's voice jarred the minds of everyone around him awake. Huh? This chapter upload first at NovelBin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. A small sweep of confusion breezed through the group, but no one seemed to understand what had happened. It was like they had just woken up from a dream, but their memory of it had already been shattered. Yuri, what's the range of your internal sight? Yuri, who had lagged behind in her little act a bit, was stunned by Lionel's sudden question. After she composed herself, she, quite frankly, didn't want to answer. But it wasn't long before both Savon and Aina's gazes landed on her, causing her to bite her lip in unwillingness. 100 meters. Lionel didn't seem surprised by this answer at all, despite the fact many others looked toward her. as though they were gazing upon some kind of monster. In truth, Lionel was pissed despite the fact it didn't show on his face. He was draining himself, drastically cutting down the chances of him succeeding in what would be the later Amethyst-level trials, so that he could protect her and the others, when things would have been so much easier if she just explained this long ago. Lionel didn't hang on to this anger for long, though. There was no point. Not only would it not be helpful, even if it would be, it was still ultimately his fault that they were in this situation. Have you mastered a sensory sharing technique? Yuri frowned deeply. The answer was yes, but that didn't mean she wanted to use it, especially since she was certain that Lionel would be asking her to share with him. There were many internal sight manipulation techniques, and among them such sharing was a part. Among all those here, and maybe even among all those of their generation in the human domain, there was unlikely to be anyone who could match her in internal sight in Yuri's opinion. I can just tell you, there are two groups of people following us. 57 meters that way and 63 meters that way. Not good enough. Lionel left no room for debate. Fuse your internal sight with mine. Important author's note below. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 1295. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:45 and 9 seconds p.m. Chapter 1295. Not a doormat. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1295. Not a doormat. Almost the instant Lionel said these words, Yuri flushed completely red. Her expression flickered from embarrassment to rage to shyness and back to fury. Just her emotion alone made the small humanoid figure on Lionel's forehead waver and almost collapse entirely. The pressure on Lionel's mind became so great that his internal sight range fell to a quarter, only barely able to sustain 5 meters. Lionel's expression darkened. Yuri hadn't said a word yet, but he already didn't like where things were going. Just because he had remained silent about it until now didn't mean that he hadn't had a temper about it. If Yuri insisted on putting her own petty rage ahead of what was for the best of the group, he would have to take a stronger approach. However, before Lionel could say anything, though, Aina spoke out. Yuri confused with me. I will relay it to you. Lionel's brow furrowed. Was all this roundabout nonsense necessary? Even a split-second lag could be the difference between life and death. Infighting was inadvisable at this point, but this situation was sensitive. There was no doubt that whoever had targeted them had a larger internal sight range. Just to follow them alone took a certain amount of sensory abilities, let alone actually targeting them through the fog. When facing such people, such roundabout methods wouldn't just theoretically cause harm, they would most definitely be a detriment to the overall group. Aina. What surprised Lionel even more, though, was that even after such a concession was being made for her, Yuri still lashed out. Lionel was already unsatisfied with the concession in the first place, but she was actually still unwilling to take this route. Savon's brows furrowed. This matter was becoming very troublesome, very quickly. Aina had chosen to move on from those things, but whether it was Yuri or Miel, both of them were still riding a high of fury. Miel even had to force himself to choose against personally seeing them off for fear of what he might do to Lionel. In truth, the fact that Yuri had remained this silent all this time at all was a miracle in and of itself. This chapter upload first at NovelBin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. Unfortunately, it seemed that the peace would come. That's enough. Aina's battle axe smashed into the ground, sending a wave of force outward that knocked the beasts back several meters. Her head turned back, a fiery golden gaze landing on Yuri, shocking the latter awake from her own fury. Yuri was shocked into silence. Aina had never shown her such an expression before. It only made it worse that she was actually showing her such a face for him of all people. It made her feel all sorts of emotions she couldn't even properly qualify. Aina had drawn a line in the sand quite clearly. If Yuri felt that she was in the wrong, she could still accept this. But knowing what she knew, and knowing that Aina understood her thoughts, and still seeing her react this way, she had chosen Lionel over her, and didn't even seem hesitant to do so. Yuri's eyes watered slightly, but she blinked it away. Yes, Yuri's internal sight flourished, blanketing the surroundings. With a thought, a thin string connected to Aina, who had already turned her attention back to the beasts. There was only so much attention they could spare to other things in this sort of situation. The moment Aina felt the connection, she didn't hesitate to replicate it, taking in the sensory input, making it her own, and then forming a connection with Lionel. Lionel didn't resist when he felt something press up against his mind, and he accepted it without reserve. But the instant he felt the connection solidify, he froze. It was like he could see everything in crystal clear detail. The surroundings were so sharp and vivid that Lionel had a hard time believing that there was fog hanging in the air at all. It was as though he had gone from 480p to 8K resolution with a single flip of a switch. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. While this alone was enough to shock Lionel to no end, what he was really shocked about had little to nothing to do with how clear this image was. Rather, he was focused on something entirely different, something so real and intimate he almost blushed in the middle of a battlefield. All of Aina's thoughts were laid bare before him. As though this much wasn't bad enough, he felt a feeling that he had never experienced before. It was as though he was caressing the naked body of a woman, but he was feeling it so much more intimately than just skin deep. It was as though it was his heart itself stroking the delicate softness of her skin, of her curves, of her ample breasts and plump bottom. Shit. Bang. Lionel palmed himself on the forehead, hard. It sounded as though stone was crashing against stone, but he didn't hold back in the slightest, even leaving himself somewhat dizzy and flustered. Still, he didn't regret his actions in the slightest. In fact, he almost wanted to hit himself harder. Finally, Lionel felt his mind clear, allowing him to take a deep breath. He fully understood why it was that Yuri had been so against this. Just that subtle touch had felt more intimate than even what Lionel would imagine sex to feel like. He didn't even know what he would do if he was flooded with that kind of sensory overload if the target was Yuri. Wait, it wasn't okay either way. Lionel moved to cut the connection off entirely, but he felt a sturdy rebuff before he even could. Aina met his gaze. There was a dangerous light hidden within, almost like a wronged wife daring her husband to take things a step further, so she could pull out her rolling pin. She had already humiliated Yuri for his sake. If he dared to make her actions meaningless, she really would be pissed this time. It was then that everyone suddenly became aware that Aina was still Aina. She had made a choice to stay by Lionel's side because she wanted to, but she wasn't a doormat. Her blade edge was very much still there. Lionel slowly retracted his intent, his face still somewhat flushed. Damn it. His gaze turned in a certain direction, murderous intent flickering. He suddenly very much needed something to vent on. Chapter 1296. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:45 and 6 seconds p.m. Chapter 1296. Top tier. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1296. Top tier. Blackstar. This frontline is yours. Lionel's sudden voice reached out to the little mink who was barely visible up ahead. Despite his playful attitude, little Blackstar immediately heeded Lionel's call, flashing back through space and appearing half a meter above Lionel's head in the blink of an eye. At that moment, a dense fog began to exude from the little guy, causing his boda's size to appear to increase several-fold. Before many could grasp what was happening, little Blackstar had suddenly become an enormous black bear. No, it wasn't that the little mink had morphed. In fact, one could still see the vague image of a little mink floating within the head of the foggy construct of the 3-meter-tall black bear. It rather seemed that Blackstar's dark elemental force had formed an encasement for his small body, one that felt no less real than if the actual creature was standing before them right this moment. Absorbing the mimicry bat's blood had already evolved Blackstar down the path of being able to steal abilities, awakening that facet of his Shadow Sovereign ability index. After absorbing the Void Beast's blood, though, not only had many more facets of Blackstar's abilities been unleashed, but the ones that had already existed had also evolved. Lionel was only familiar with some of them, as the mischievous little mink never took anything very seriously. However, of the ones he was aware of, he knew that Blackstar could now house several abilities at once, and he could steal more than abilities now. The black bear construct roared, slamming down its paws and causing a wave of darkness to turn many of the charging beasts to ash. Without looking back, Lionel's figure flickered and vanished, followed quickly by Aina. The two targeted the closest group first, Lionel's mind having locked onto a particular young woman with a head of pink hair and bright blue eyes. She was quite the beauty in her own right, although falling several steps short of Aina. Still, her body radiated as though carved out of a gem. It gave her a charisma that went past just her raw looks alone. Using Aina as a bridge to Yuri's senses, Lionel could immediately tell that she was the culprit. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. Lionel didn't bother to hide his actions. He could feel that they had been being observed all this time. The moment they cut toward the group, they had already been discovered. The swath of beasts in their path were cut down by Lionel one after another, his left hand still striking down at the air as he commanded little Tali to form dagger after dagger. By the time they had cut the distance by half, leaving just over 25 meters to cover, dozens of daggers had already been controlled to Lionel's back, each gleaming with a menacing light. Despite knowing he was well out of range, Lionel still sent over a dozen daggers whizzing forward, their bodies leaving streaking lines of silver that vanished into the fog. In that moment, the pink-haired woman's eyes lit up. Enemy attack. She spoke these words almost too calmly, as though she didn't need to explain anything more. But astonishingly, those around her reacted as though they could read her mind as well, brandishing their weapons in Lionel's direction, and parrying the strikes away with a calm efficiency. Lionel's gaze narrowed. He didn't quite understand what had just happened. Had they connected their internal sights as well? But after learning what that meant and represented, Lionel had a hard time believing that a girl, or anyone for that matter, would so easily agree to do such a thing with a large group of people. Lionel felt that he was missing something. But he had almost forgotten that he had a cheat. Old man, be useful. Cheating again? This isn't very kingly of you. I'm too ignorant of things that seem to be common knowledge for other people. If anything, I'm just trying to level the playing field. If I really wanted to cheat, I'd be using your senses and not Yuri's. Hurry up. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. Whatever helps you sleep at night. If I really sent out my internal sight, you'd end up being sniped and killed in just a few seconds. In my prime, I could hide from them, but you've trapped me in this ring after keeping me split in half. What do you want me to do about that exactly? Less complaining, more explanations. That girl is a member of the Gamine family. They're basically the only ones of the human domain who understand anything about the soul at all. You can relay words and images through thought far faster than through words. She can do that without issue. Hold on, then why is this matter such a big deal? Why didn't Yuri just do that in the first place? You're such an idiot. You didn't ask her to do that. Your specific words were to fuse your internal sights. That's a completely different ask. Lionel would be lying if he said he wasn't feeling a bit embarrassed hearing such an explanation. Why didn't you say anything then? Why would I say something? It was peak entertainment. I couldn't stop laughing. You essentially went up to a girl and asked her to strip naked in front of you. Top-tier comedy, really. A true modern-day Casanova. Lionel's jaw set. For once, he didn't rebuttal, but his gaze still flashed with a dangerous light. He didn't like having his mind played with. Even though he had seen through it almost immediately, he wouldn't stand for it. Lionel's king's might bloomed, the humanoid figure on his forehead becoming more prominent, as it sent a wave of pressure forward. His thoughts were simple. First divide, then conquer. What better way to do that than to disrupt the abilities of this young woman of the Gamine family? Stay close to me. Lionel spoke to Aina. I'll end this as quickly as possible. The tendrils that trailed to Lionel's back flared like a peacock's tail. Then once again they all whipped forward simultaneously. Chapter 1297. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:45 and 2 seconds p.m. Chapter 1297. Fleeced. If audio player doesn't work, Press stop then play button again. Chapter 1297. Fleeced. Kiza immediately saw through the trajectories of Lionel's throws. But when she tried to communicate it, her pupils constricted. She picked up a lag in her actions and understood that she wouldn't be able to relay the information in time. Enemy attack. Prepare yourselves. Those around Kiza understood that something had gone wrong, but they weren't too shocked by it. They were all geniuses in their own right, and they had enough experience to understand that Kiza's abilities weren't infallible. They were still ready to react. However, when Lionel's strikes came into view, they were caught completely off guard nonetheless. Lionel had purposely sent his first volley from outside a range he was comfortable with. As a result, it had lulled them all into a false sense of security, believing that Lionel's strikes were normal and easy to handle. But this volley was completely unlike the last. They moved through the air as though they had minds of their own. Sometimes daggers would diverge, and at other times they were suddenly clang off of each other, shooting off in directions completely opposing to the trajectories they had originally been following. Toward this sight, even Kiza pupils constricted. They had been following Lionel's trail for a very long time now, so Kiza had, of course, been focused on comprehending his abilities. It was only after grasping all of this that she took the risk to try to subtly influence Lionel's mind. This was why Kiza hadn't panicked after Lionel shattered her control. No genius of the golden token level would be so easily swayed by her suggestion, especially not in this environment. This was why she had gathered up all the information she needed first. The trouble was that after her long observation, she had concluded that the limit of Lionel's range was about 5 meters. This was surprising, but still made logical sense to her. After all, maybe the only person unaware of how important long-ranged attacks were in the Void Palace was Lionel himself. However, what Kiza hadn't grasped was the fact that Lionel had been purposely reigning in his range all this time, so as not to draw too much attention to himself. Kiza had made a small concession for this possibility, but the idea that Lionel's range was as much as 20 meters didn't even cross her mind. Why? This chapter upload first at novelbin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit novelnext.com to experience faster update speed, because it should have been impossible. By the time Kiza awakened from her shock, the bodies of many of her comrades had been pierced completely through. Even those that managed to deflect and protect themselves ended up in sorry positions, allowing the horde of beasts around them to lash out and take advantage. Another 3 of her comrades were severely injured in this way even before she reacted. Kiza's blue gaze became steely. Lionel had purposely not targeted her because he knew he would need at least a bow or a true throwing weapon to make a difference. However, this lack of danger had made her even a step later to react than she normally would have been. Kiza had already had an elevated opinion of Lionel. But at that moment, it raised another several levels. Her arms flared outward, 7 feather-shaped weapons appearing to hover around her head, shoulders and arms as though they had minds of their own. The moment Lionel burst through the final line of fog and appeared before her eyes, she reacted, 4 of them flying forth with blinding speed and 3 remaining back to defend. Her hair seemed to gain an extra glow to it, her skin shimmering like gems. Lionel's spear spun in his hands, his left palm finding its way back to its shaft and clamping downward. Ding, 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 ding. The rotation struck away all 4 feather blades, but their pursuit was relentless, stifling Lionel's forward momentum in just a single volley. At the same time, those that had survived Lionel's initial onslaught rebuffed a tide of beasts before beginning to attack Lionel and Aina from the side. Don't encircle him. Remain where you are and attack from there, Kiza coldly commanded. There was a biting sharpness to her current self that hadn't been there before, but no one dared to ignore her words. This chapter upload first at novelbin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit novelnext.com to experience faster update speed. Lionel himself already felt that he had underestimated the effort he would need in this exchange. His forward momentum had already stopped and to his back, there were more beasts. Aina had already turned back to deflect their attacks along with the support of his tendrils, but if things continued like this, they would end up just helping Kiza and the others to clear the beasts until they reached the safe zone. Lionel had to admit that Kiza was very clever. Her choice not to encircle them was perfect, forcing Lionel and Aina to take a brunt of the pressure off of them all while facing their attacks. Lionel had chosen to strike first, not wanting to be taken advantage of. But he realized they would lose more than they gained by making this a long, drawn-out battle. At the same time, the second group that had been following them seemed to be making a move, picking up speed as they cut a path toward Lionel's people, and making the situation far more complicated. This group happened to be one containing the 2 Libra family brothers. It seems you've made a mistake in targeting the wrong group. Lionel's gaze narrowed. You made it so that I would attack you and not them. Kiza smiled sweetly. Handsome and smart. You could say that they paid for my services to push you in the wrong direction. How much did they pay you? Oh my, are you asking me to sell myself again? That would make me feel so cheap. Aina suddenly found herself becoming very irritated. If it wasn't for these damned restrictions she was under thanks to this anarchic force, she would have already sliced this succubus in half. How much? Lionel pressed again, his voice cold. He was clearly being targeted and that made things troublesome. If he was alone, this matter would be simple to handle, but he had people to protect, and he was running out of time. The worst part was that he didn't know what the exchange rates were just yet, so it was very likely that he could get fleeced. Wise Star Order's laughter echoed in his head. The old man was enjoying this too much. Chapter 1298. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:45 and 1 second p.m. Chapter 1298. Surge if audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1298. Surge. Kiza placed a hand to her chest, pouting slightly at Lionel's rudeness. If one didn't know better, you would have truly thought that she had been wronged by Lionel. It's not impossible for you to buy me off, but the hit to my reputation will be a very heavy burden to take on. Lionel's brows furrowed. Why was this woman constantly lacing her words in double entendres? It might have worked had Lionel been susceptible to her coercion, but obviously he wasn't. The only explanation, then, was that she was wasting time. She had no intention of allowing Lionel to buy her. The moment Lionel reached this conclusion, his mind's focus shifted, locking onto the group led by the Libra brothers. His mind spun, sifting through one plan after another. The distances were too short, but the beast tide gave them a buffer. The main issue was that this beast tide was getting thinner as they approached the safe zone, which was exactly why their enemies had waited until right this moment to target them in earnest. In a moment, Lionel had made a decision. A roar left his lips, a surge of universal force erupting from him. In that instant, Kiza went through 3 rapid changes of expression. The first was shock that Lionel hadn't bothered to continue negotiating with her and instantly entered a higher battle state. The second was disdain after realizing Lionel's universal force was only at the Four Seasons realm. And the third and final reaction was once again shock after she suddenly grasped that this wasn't normal comprehension. This was true state universal force. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. She had forgotten one very important thing. In a density of anarchic force like this, regular universal force below a certain level couldn't be called down upon. Only those who had mastered true state universal force could manifest this strength at any level. Summer. Radiant core. Lionel abandoned spring, winter and fall, putting everything he had into his artistic conception of summer. A flurry of radiant cores began to appear, dozens of them hovering before the daggers held up by Lionel's tendrils. In that moment, it was as though the ends of Lionel's tendrils had become volatile drill bits, spinning wildly with violent circulations of bow force. The strong rotational, electromagnetic and gravitational abilities of Lionel's radiant core bloomed. Kiza's mind trembled, a towering sense of danger overwhelming her. Lionel's Four Seasons realm comprehension was too low level to provide any large boost to his force, and especially not his bow force, any longer. However, it didn't need to. In this environment, universal force had a countering force to anarchic force. In fact, it could be said that universal and anarchic force were two sides of the same coin, one representing the light, and the other touching upon darkness. As a result of this, The impact anarchic force had on Lionel's attacks fell by a large measure. To anyone else, this might be a negligible matter. However, to a bowman like Lionel, it essentially meant that he had suddenly become the apex predator of this battlefield. Lionel's gaze flashed, realizing the change immediately. As expected, his dream simulation had been correct. His dozens of tendrils flexed. Kiza wasn't a pushover by any stretch of the imagination. The moment she realized the situation had turned unfavorable, she shot backward, her body lifting up into the air and over the beasts as she kept her eyes trained on Lionel. However, from the very beginning, she had never been Lionel's target. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed in a single smooth motion. Lionel's tendrils rocketed forward before rebounding in the opposite direction, spinning about themselves and sending out dozens of red gold, spinning drills of bow force rocketing toward the Libra group. Kiza's expression changed. That was ridiculous. The distance between the two groups following Lionel and the others had been just over 100 meters initially, just within the abilities of their communication devices. The distance had been cut to about 60 to 70 meters as they made their way toward Little Black Star and the others, but sending an attack out from that distance should have been impossible in this environment. Under any other circumstances, Kiza would be correct. Her deductions were perfect, her mind was quick and her calculations were accurate. Unfortunately, her opponent was Lionel Morales. Juan and Droit blazed a path toward Lionel's group, feeling that they were on a time crunch. They had been able to lay back and relax most of this time because they had forced those around them to do the brunt of the work, and, also, following behind Lionel had been like following a safe zone. The beasts behind their group had been much sparser, and, though not to an exaggerated extent, most beasts tended to aim for Lionel, as most of their comrades fell in that direction. This had allowed the brothers to maintain themselves at near peak condition, just enough for them to go all out now. In just a few more seconds they would make it. However, what neither of them could have expected was for the foggy skies to suddenly light up as though several red suns were boring down on them, each splicing through the air as though they had minds of their own and falling down from above with lethal intentions. The eyes of the brothers widened. Enemy attack. The assumption that both Juan and Droit made was that they had accidentally offended a powerful beast, one that could attack them from outside their range of sight, had to be at least tier 7, if not higher. In fact, they even believed that this might have been the final hurdle they had to cross to be allowed into the safe zone. However, caught off guard, and being attacked from a direction completely opposing to the destination they were facing, the results were devastating. Screams of horror and cacophonic booms resounded. Lionel's timing was all too perfect, and the Libra group found themselves in shambles. The two brothers could only brandish their rope darts with dark expressions, turning to face the direction of their attackers. Chapter 1299. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 59 seconds p.m. Chapter 1299. Sparks. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1299. Sparks. Lionel didn't look in the direction he sent his volley of attacks, his focus still concentrated on Kiza. Despite what seemed like disregard, he found this woman to be very dangerous, and he didn't like the idea of turning his back on her. She's flying, but she hasn't flown very high. There's probably a good reason for that. Lionel made a mental note of this. He too could fly, but he hadn't done so because he needed to escort everyone else. Obviously, though, from what it seemed here, there had to be some hidden danger in taking that route. Lionel didn't believe that there weren't cursed flying beasts. They were just lucky that there was a thick canopy of trees here. Or else maybe they would have to deal with attacks from the sky as well. Lionel suddenly felt his connection with Aina waver, causing his expression to shift. I didn't account for that. There must be a great strain on her mind right now to not only assimilate Yuri's senses, but then also pass them off to me. I can't press this situation anymore. Aina hadn't said a word from start to finish. In fact, even now, she still protected Lionel's back, swinging her axe and ensuring that no cursed beasts could attack from the back. Seeing such a scene, Lionel didn't hesitate any longer. Not sparing Kiza another glance, he turned and retreated, wrapping an arm around Aina's waist as his universal force flourished. Almost the instant he did, Aina weakly wobbled, but his grip was firm. Kiza found herself caught off guard again before clicking her tongue. Asking me such intimate questions, and then running off with another girl. How rude. This chapter upload first at novelbin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit novelnext.com to experience faster update speed. Kiza giggled to herself, seemingly not realizing that her team members were still on their back foot in this situation, due to having placed too much attention on Lionel, and not enough on the beasts surrounding them. Lionel pretended as though he hadn't heard a thing, heavy droplets of molten gold becoming his footrests as he shot through the skies, relying on his artistic conception of spring. In a few massive leaps, Lionel landed beside the still rampaging Black Star. By this point, the safe zone could be seen with the naked eye. A thin gold barrier surrounded yet another village. Cursed beasts rushed around it, not daring to step foot within. Lionel gave Aina another glance, but he chose to hold on to her in the end. Her brows were marred with sweat and breathing was heavy and labored. She had clearly pushed herself very hard. Since the safe zone wasn't far away, he didn't think it was right to leave her be like this. He could only ignore all the knowing stares and winks he was getting right this moment. Soon, the group had made a final push and crossed the safe zone barrier. Lionel looked back and met Yuri's gaze. The latter was silent and didn't have much of an expression right now at all. In fact, she seemed to be quite a muted version of her current self. I'm sorry. I was ignorant and made an inappropriate ask of you. Yuri took a while to realize that Lionel was actually speaking to her. But even after she did realize this, she didn't know how to respond. The result was her mouth hanging open for a moment, but not the slightest inkling of sound coming out. He apologized to her? In truth, Yuri had already guessed that Lionel had misspoken. But she had a lot of anger for him and couldn't stand to explain herself. Lionel understood where Yuri came from with a lot of the way she acted, and he didn't blame her. If Aina's best friend didn't always have her back even when the world was against her, then who would? If even the far more reasonable Savon didn't like his actions very much, Lionel wasn't arrogant enough to still believe he was perfect. This chapter upload first at novelbin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit novelnext.com to experience faster update speed. That said, the only reason Lionel hadn't tried to see things from Yuri's perspective earlier was because she hadn't explicitly told them that their minds were being targeted, or that they were being followed despite the fact she should have known. Unfortunately, what Lionel was unaware of was the fact that Yuri hadn't known. She had a habit ingrained into her by meal to always hold back her true strength. In reality, even the 100-meter estimate she had given Lionel was a lie. That was just a fraction of her true range even in this environment. It wasn't until she realized they were being targeted that she let loose a little bit. In addition, the reason why she used such a roundabout way to inform Lionel was also because of her habit of hiding herself. Not everything she did was from a malicious or petty view. It was just that Lionel didn't know about her past and why it had to be hidden. But that was also precisely why what Aina had done hurt so much more than anything else. Anyone else could be ignorant, but Aina knew all of those things. And still chose Lionel's side. It was like she had drawn a hard line in the sand. It was either Yuri accept that she would always have feelings for Lionel, or they wouldn't be sisters anymore. These were the emotions that Yuri was trying to process when Lionel so suddenly did something she hadn't expected. Unable to come up with a proper response, Yuri crossed her arms and looked away. You're too nice for your own good. And somehow also not nice enough when you should be. Yuri mumbled beneath her breath. These words were only meant for her to hear, but she had clearly underestimated Lionel a bit too much. Even hearing this though, Lionel could only chuckle. Seeing that this matter was resolved, at least for now, Lionel began to look around. He needed to find a place to allow Aina to rest, and he also wasn't sure how long it would before this safe zone was no longer a safe zone, much like the previous village 0012. Before he could find an answer to this, though, another group charged in from a separate entrance. Beaten and bloodied, the Libra brothers and what remained of their cohort collapsed. The Libra brothers themselves seemed to be fairly unscathed, but their expressions were very much dark. By their sides, a smiling Kiza stood, unblemished and beaming like a small star. Sparks almost instantly flew through the air. Chapter 1300. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 57 seconds p.m. Chapter 1300. Pass? Or not? If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1300. Pass? Or not? Lionel met their gazes, his own narrowing. The sight of the Libra brothers wasn't something that he was expecting. It was the first time he was seeing such odd humans. The natural blue hair of the Aderna family was already a great shock to him. But the white as clouds and dark as night skin of the twins was yet another culture shock for Lionel. The both of them seemed as though they had been painted into reality rather than being naturally occurring. Still, Lionel only lingered on this thought for a moment. What was more intriguing was the odd way force moved about the two of them. There was a clear push and pull effect between the two brothers as though they were pulling in force together and separating it into parts in a game of tug-of-war. In the end, there would be a light pop and the rope would cleanly separate, leaving each brother with their own clean half of the force. It was a perfect sort of a balance. Droid's force was a bit lighter and brighter while Juan's force was a bit darker and heavier. Lionel looked away. He couldn't waste any more time on these people. There was a time crunch. He took a step forward but Aina was a bit slow. Seeing that her legs felt weak, Lionel put away his spear and swept her legs into his arms as well, not really thinking twice about it. Juan and Droid frowned at this scene. If Aina was a normal beauty, they wouldn't have even thought twice about what they were seeing. What kind of beauty hadn't they experienced with their noble standing? Unfortunately, Aina wasn't very normal at all. These petty feelings only made the anger they felt toward their failed ambush worse. But within the safe zones, the rules of the Void Palace were put back into place. It was already too late for them to do much of anything. Surprisingly, though, Lionel didn't get the chance to explore very long before a flash of light appeared before them. Soon it faded, revealing the figure of Asena within. This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novelnext.com to experience faster update speed. The safe zone was quite small, only being about 30 or so meters in diameter. So despite the fact Asena stood at the center, she was still viewable to them all through the gaps left between the storefronts that called the core of the village home. Congratulations on making it this far. You can now be considered nominal disciples of the Void Palace. Lionel's expression flickered, but then he settled down in understanding. They had been fighting without pause or rest for more than a day. If it wasn't for him and Little Blackstar taking up the vanguard, and then him proceeding to take the brunt of the pressure away from everyone else, it was likely that no one would have passed from the three-pillar sector. Of course, that was also because Lionel's coma hadn't allowed them the time they needed to acclimate. There was no doubt that they would have performed far better if given the same time to adjust as everyone else. If Lionel had to be objective, probably about half of those here would have managed to pass. If they were able to all work together like they did under him, and not allow their clashing origins and backgrounds to interfere, then at least 60 to 70% would have passed. The quality of their sector was definitely decent even if it didn't seem like it. That said, it was still lagging behind others. If not for Lionel's interference, 100% of both Kiza and the Libra brothers groups would have passed. And that was taking into consideration the fact all three hardly raised a finger at all. Those without tokens will be staying here. You will have 1 year from this point to make it to the next safe zone, or else your nominal disciple rank will be revoked. Those with gold tokens, you may remain in this safe zone for 3 hours before you must leave and head to the next checkpoint. From now on, this will be a contest of not just checkpoints, but also speed. Safe zones will only allow a certain number of tokens to pass through. Some will only accept 1 while some will accept up to 3. You will be able to tell by the zone size. Good luck. After saying these words, Asena vanished once more, leaving Lionel surprised once more. It seems that he had been too naive. How could the Void Palace make things so easy, even if it was for nominal disciples? This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novelnext.com to experience faster update speed. From what it sounded like, Making it up the mountain was a rite of passage for all students. Even if you were a nominal disciple, you would have to do it. It was just that you were given a little more time to do so, while those who carried the burden of higher-level tokens were under a stricter time crunch. It was likely that if you wanted to graduate from your status as a nominal disciple, you would have to make it all the way up the mountain to the final checkpoint within the allotted time given to you. Another 3 hours, huh? The 3 golden token holders of the 3-pillar sector were Miguel, Aina and Noah. And of course, there was Lionel, who had the amethyst token and was obviously involved with all of this as well. Miguel had already gone ahead. Lionel wasn't sure if he had already stopped by the safe zone and chose to leave already, or if it was the case that he had went in another direction and ended up at a completely different safe zone. Either way, he wasn't here. Ultimately, Lionel decided that this was a net positive. Now everyone had a year to adjust, and with the storefronts here, they could exchange for everything they needed. Since there wasn't anything necessarily tying down this safe zone to Village 0012, they shouldn't experience the same problems. 3 hours need to be more efficient this time. I'll be back in a few minutes. Lionel's gaze narrowed. He realized that there was one elephant in the room he hadn't considered just yet, and trying to ignore it could lead to a lot of problems. Carrying Aina, he quickly made his way to the storefronts. Chapter 1301. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 55 seconds p.m. Chapter 1301. Void points and void merits. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1301. Void points and void merits. The issue was obvious. This space was simply too small, and by the last word she spoke, Asena had implicitly stated an even greater problem. There was no population limit. Why would Asena mention a cap on future safe zones, but say nothing about this one? If Lionel was correct, not only were there not enough safe zones for most, even the ones that existed were so small an area that very few could hope to call this place home. Ultimately, most would be squeezed out and forced to their deaths. The idea of a congratulatory message was nothing more than a method of lulling them into a false sense of security. One might say that the Void Palace rules would protect those within this space, and such a person would be right. But for how long would that last? During this year, those here would have to grow strong enough to make it to the next checkpoint, which was also an unknown distance away. By the time Lionel had gotten here, Tier 3 beasts were already becoming far more frequent. So who knew what tier you'd have to be able to face just to make it? Even if you gave up and wanted to idle for the rest of this year, realizing you were in over your head and felt that expulsion was the best path for you, you would still need to exchange for food and water, something you would need as frequently if not more so than a third-dimensional existence, due to the constraint of fighting off anarchic force. To exchange for this, you would have no choice but to exit the safe zone. And then what? By then it would be a free-for-all. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. The worst part was that even if by some miracle just the right number of people filled in this space and no one deemed it necessary to take the risk of targeting fellow disciples to survive, there were still a limited number of resources to go around. Take the spatial bristle bush. It could only be harvested once every several days before it could be taken from again. And that was just one example. Lionel was absolutely certain that the other resources worked the exact same way. After this beast tide calmed, there would only be so many beasts in the region before you had to travel further out. Only so many herbs to harvest, only so many precious gems and metals to mine or even find, for that matter. Then one needed to consider that there would be many ambitious individuals. Considering what Lionel had come to understand, the standard of this year's entries were much higher than previous. There would be many unsatisfied with staying as nominal disciples, and would do everything they could to reach higher and higher levels. For such people, even if everyone could coexist, they wouldn't care. They would demolish everything that stood in their way. This all led to one conclusion. There would be a bloodbath here, maybe one no less lethal and heart-wrenching than what was waiting for Lionel during the rest of this selection. He couldn't leave his people here, especially while still in such a vulnerable state. He had to set them up for success. Lionel entered a storefront he hadn't seen in Village 0012. He expected that he would find a very different experience here than he had over there. And he was found to be correct almost immediately. This storefront didn't have a person in it at all. In fact, though it was shabby in construction and the floors creaked, all while a musty smell hung in the air, making it feel just as ancient as it was, Lionel could feel a strong and sturdy current of force running through this place. He had no doubt that the central hub and power center of this safe zone was this place. If this location was compromised, then the whole safe zone would cease to be. But Lionel had a feeling that even if he went all out, he wouldn't be able to leave even a single dent in this so-called shabby cabin. Lionel stepped toward an empty counter. The moment he did, his mind seemed to have warped and his vision blurred before refocusing in a land of white and panels. This chapter upload first at NovelBin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. Before Lionel could do anything, the panels rearranged themselves, many of the items that had been there vanishing. Lionel had a feeling that this was related to his current status. This panel would likely only show him things that nominal disciples could exchange for. Lionel didn't actually plan on exchanging for anything, though. What he wanted to understand was how much wealth he had now, and what it was worth. Only when he had this information could he decide what steps to take moving forward. Of course, that also required understanding what his point total could trade for as well. One void point is worth 1,000 kilograms of 6-dimensional herb ore? That's more than I expected, so void points are definitely very valuable. Lionel had a large amount of 6-dimensional herb ore left to him by his mother. Billions of kilograms, in fact, not to mention millions of kilograms of 7th-dimensional herb ore again. Unfortunately, while you could trade void points for herb ore, you couldn't do the vice versa. Void merits? Lionel's gaze narrowed. It seemed that void points were only one part of the currency system of this place. Void merits was another. And unlike void points, there didn't seem to be a one-to-one exchange rate provided for void merits. This immediately told Lionel that they could be considered to be invaluable. Lionel shook his head and refocused. If void merits were so valuable, he definitely wouldn't use it on a list restricted to nominal disciples. Plus, he hadn't earned even one just yet. Finally, Lionel found what he was looking for. So it's like that. A 1 cubic meter spatial bristle ring is worth 10 void points. The next highest tier is worth 100. The next following is worth 500. 500 void points for such a small ring. But then the core of the spatial bristle bush is actually worth 2,500 void points. That would mean that altogether I have 52,000 void points. The real question is then, what can that exchange for? Chapter 1302. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 54 seconds p.m. Chapter 1302. Choice if audio player doesn't work. Press stop then play button again. Chapter 1302 Choice. Lionel's pupils flickered back and forth quickly, scanning through the long list of items within just a few minutes. The fact it had taken so long, though, was a testament to just how many times there were available for exchange. Under this kind of time crunch, it was impossible that most would be able to go through the entire list to find out what they might need. Once he was done, Lionel took a deep breath and closed his eyes, his mind quickly arranging the new information he now had access to. The amount of things was a bit overwhelming, even for him. There were all sorts of items from techniques, to styles, to weapons and armor. There were special herbs, odd concoctions. It was even possible to exchange time with instructors or seniors to learn new skills firsthand. Some of the most valuable things on the list were related to the God path and understanding it. There were also options to be transported to meditation halls. Though Lionel assumed that once your time was up, you'd be forcefully transported right back to this safe zone. Realizing just how much choice he had before him, Lionel first decided what was most important to deal with. The first and most important thing is to acclimate everyone to anarchic force as quickly as possible. Though the beast's skin armor protects them and helps facilitate the acclimation, it also makes the process a lot slower. If they dispel the armor now, it would still take most of them about as much as another 3 days to a week to fully adjust. That's way too much time. They'll be driven out by then. There are probably 2 solutions to this. One is to allow them to naturally adjust themselves. Rather than trying to speed up the process, he'll just buy them enough food and water so that they can survive the period without being in danger. The second option is to buy up these herbs and potions that can speed up the process and compress it into a short time. This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novel Next. To experience faster update speed. The first wastes a lot of time, and they'll end up being behind everyone else by several days. The second, though, is very expensive. If I took that route, I would blast through at least 30 to 40,000 void points worth. This wasn't very surprising to Lionel. A medicine that could speed up how fast one could acclimate to anarchic force was practically a miracle drug or vaccine. These supplements were mostly used by higher-level seniors who had to quickly adjust themselves to certain sections of the void battlefields, and could be considered to be life-saving measures for already well-established geniuses. In fact, it could be said that the 40,000 point price tag was actually quite cheap, and that was only because the anarchic force in this region compared to others was pitiful. As such, Lionel only needed to buy up the weakest of these drugs for about 24 people, and yet it was still so expensive in the end. Taking this route would leave Lionel with practically nothing. He wouldn't be able to help as much as he wanted. I could trade the beast carcasses I have as well. They're not as valuable as the spatial bristle rings, but I do have a lot more of them. No. Well, do things this way. Lionel shook his head, his gaze flashing as he came to a decision. After a few more seconds, Lionel quickly exchanged for everything he needed and walked out, only to find a line waiting outside. Seems I was quicker, that's good. Lionel felt that he was lucky to have entered first. Considering how long those lists were, who knew how much time another person would have wasted? He stepped by everyone, ignoring the looks they gave toward Aina, who was seemingly taking a nap in his arms, and returned to the three-pillar group. This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novel Next. To experience faster update speed. Yip. Yip. Little Blackstar hopped onto Lionel's head, his two little paws holding onto two spatial bristle rings that Lionel had purposely left behind. With a flick, one landed with Arnold and Elther while the other was given to Savon and Yuri. Lionel's gaze glowed for a moment, cutting off all noise from exiting their general area. Yuri, I hope you can help make sure that no one is eavesdropping on us. I have a few important things to say. Yuri looked toward the peaceful Aina before nodding lightly. This was all Lionel needed before he began. Thanks. Lionel turned his attention to everyone. I hope that even after I am gone, you all will stick together. I've given those 2 rings to people you all can trust. As much as I want to give one to each of you, if I had done that, I wouldn't have been able to trade for everything you all would need. When Lionel said this, there was a slight breath of relief released by those that remained. It had felt like Lionel was abandoning them all already, but now they could be a bit more reassured. At the same time, Lionel could protect those he trusted by leaving this power in their hands. That way, those that he didn't know a lot about couldn't take advantage of the situation. First things first, I've left enough safe food and water within those rings to last you all a week. During this week, I want you to slowly and naturally become accustomed to anarchic force on your own. This will not only save you from any lingering side effects in the future, but it will also equip you to better deal with higher concentrations in later regions. I have already bought enough homes for all of you as well. With a flick of his wrist, some vouchers that Lionel had purchased appeared. Soon, a row of wooden homes appeared along the outskirts of the safe zone. They seemed tight-knit and safe. For the next week, as long as they remained inside, no one would be able to touch them. The good news also was that these homes were very cheap, a fraction of the cost of even the lowest-tier spatial bristle ring. All of them together didn't even add up to half that cost either. It was clear the Void Palace didn't think very highly of these cabins. Now I'll explain what to do following this week. Chapter 1303. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 52 seconds p.m. Chapter 1303. Are you? If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1303. Are you? The beauty of Lionel's choice was that up until this point, he had spent practically nothing. All the cabins weren't even worth 5 void points while all the food and water were picked up by him. The water, of course, came from his cleansing water stores. He had downgraded it back to the 4th dimension as he didn't want its specialness to become common knowledge, but that would be more than enough. As for the food, it was cursed beast meat cleansed by 6th-dimensional cleansing waters. It might become boring to eat after a week, but at least they wouldn't starve. This was the main reason why Lionel chose this route. Like this, he would be able to use all more than 50,000 void points he had remaining toward improving the odds of them all surviving. The beast armor he had left them, so long as they acclimated to anarchic force, would provide them a huge boost to their strength. The moment the power of the armor could be diverted from protecting them to just attacking and defending, there would be a qualitative change in them all. By Lionel's estimations, this boost in strength in conjunction with their own raw power would raise them to a level where they would have been able to easily clear their way to this safe zone from Village 0012. This would put them at or above the level of many of the nominal disciples that remained. However, this wouldn't be enough. That was where the real training would come in. Lionel poured everything else into resources. For those he could tailor the experience of, he did so, picking out a perfect complementary technique for them. For those he couldn't, he focused on buying things that could accelerate their growth, whether that was in force or bodily strength. When Lionel was finished, everyone understood what they had to focus on for at least the next months. If they took advantage of this, not only would the gap between them and everyone else close, but they would even gain a leg up. They all gazed toward Lionel. They didn't know how much he had to sacrifice to allow them this chance, but they knew it couldn't have been cheap. How could they not feel grateful? Well, it's time for us to go. Lionel smiled lightly. I hope the next time I see you all, you'll not only still have your lives, but you'll be much stronger as well. Lionel took his responsibility to these people very seriously. It wasn't just about his guilt or his morality. Everyone here represented his foundation. They were the backbone of what he was building and they were all he had. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net if you want to read more chapters, please visit Novel Next. To experience faster update speed years from now, he would have to face off against 6 of his distant cousins, each of whom were likely monsters in their own right, and each of whom had roots deeply entrenched into the Void Palace long ago. He was already several steps behind. So, every one he took forward had to be meticulous, purposeful and perfect. He couldn't afford to leave any stone unturned, and he couldn't allow himself to waste any more time. Noah. Lionel called out. Though there was a 3-hour limit, he wouldn't be wasting any of that time here. Asena had made it clear how much of a time crunch they were on. If he really spent 3 hours here, he would be an idiot. Lionel, I think. Lionel smiled. You want to go your own way too, right? Yes. Noah nodded seriously. If he kept following behind Lionel, he wouldn't never be able to improve like he wanted. Plus, he was a fox. Behind his stoic face and expressionless gaze, there was his own emperor's might lurking. Just like Lionel, whenever he got serious, an oppressive pressure would stifle the air, and that wasn't a coincidence by any stretch. He had royal blood flowing through his veins. Here. Little Blackstar tossed over a vial of grayish liquid after feeling Lionel's intent. This will help you adjust to anarchic force fully within a few hours. By then you'll be able to show your true strength. Keep in mind, though, that there will be side effects. So, Little Blackstar moved again, passing off another vial to Noah. After you adjust to anarchic force fully, drink this and it will get rid of the impurities for you. Noah held onto the 2 vials tightly, not sure of what to say for a long while. However, Lionel only grinned. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net if you want to read more chapters, please visit Novel Next. To experience faster update speed. Don't get sentimental on me now, we're family, aren't we? Yes. Noah nodded. Noah had never really had brothers. There were too many people trying to use him every day. The only person he trusted within his generation was Jessica. But ultimately, their relationship was between man and woman. It wasn't the same, especially not when they had unresolved emotions for one another. This just felt different. No more time to waste. Oh, go that direction. Noah nodded. Oh, go in that one then. With a smile, Lionel's figure flickered and vanished, hitting his top speed in the blink of an eye. Lionel adjusted Aina into a position on his back, using some more beast fur he had gained to tie her down firmly. Somehow, this situation felt oddly familiar, but his thoughts didn't linger on this as he secured her. Once he was finished, Lionel took a breath of fresh air, or a breath of air about as fresh as you could get in a place like this one. He finally felt like he could go all out. A road of stars appeared beneath his feet as he shuttled over the now slowly waning beast tide. Despite the fact they were slowing, though, Lionel didn't place his guard down. It wasn't a coincidence that the beast tide was finally showing signs of weakening, just as the first wave of people reached the first safe zones. Clearly, the beast tide was a challenge for the first part of the true selection. That meant there would likely be a new challenge coming up very soon. Lionel leapt up, landing on the branch of a tree. With a flicker of his finger, a strand of bow force split a beast that leapt up with him in two. Are you all going to continue following me for an entire day like you did the first time again? Or can we skip that nonsense? Chapter 1304. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 51 seconds p.m. Chapter 1304. Your method. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1304. Your method. After learning the usefulness of universal force in this region, Lionel was much more acutely aware of his surroundings. Just by infusing his universal force with his internal sight, his range had increased tenfold. If that was stacked with his king's might, his understanding of the region around him might not have been as bright and crisp as Yuri's, but it was most definitely functional. Simply put, his sensory abilities of just a few hours ago couldn't compare to his abilities now in the slightest. Seeing within 100-meter range was no problem at all, and if it wasn't for him minding the stamina drain, he could push further beyond that. Standing on the bouncing branch, one hand on the tree's trunk and the other holding his spear, Lionel looked down. In a few moments, Droit, Juan and Kiza caught up, appearing up in their own trees. Whether by coincidence or not, each of them blocked a path of retreat. It could be said that if they were coming for peace, they weren't doing a very good job. But Lionel wasn't so naive to hope for such a thing. Kiza raised a brow. Her gaze fell on Aina, whose cheek rested on Lionel's shoulder. It was clear that Aina wasn't wasting the slightest effort to pay attention to her surroundings. She left it all up to Lionel. Even her battle axe had been taken away by him, and stored away without her even flinching in her sleep. Kiza couldn't help but playfully pout. Why can't one of you two carry me around like that? My legs are tired after walking so far. The two brothers looked toward Kiza. It was as though they were trying to check if she was serious or not first before they decided how they would react. Useless. Kiza shook her head, feeling greatly unsatisfied. If they were confident, why would they have to check on her meaning first? This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novelnext.com to experience faster update speed. The brothers, though, felt quite aggrieved. Kiza had been teasing them like this since they were children. One would think they would have seen through her by now, but the women of the Gamine family were innately difficult to deal with. Even together, the two didn't dare to underestimate her. Much like the two brothers were the first instance in a very long time of their family's lineage factor brought to perfection, so was Kiza with hers. So long as that woman was still smiling, things were fine. But the moment that playfulness vanished, the Libra and Gamine family actually had a very close relationship with one another. If not for this, the twins would have never so easily asked for the support of someone else. Kiza had actually come from a completely different village, but had still managed to locate the brothers. It was clear that they had every intention on relying upon one another for the coming trials. Are you done yet? Though Lionel said this, his eyes weren't actually focused on the three surrounding him at all. In fact, he was sweeping the surroundings, trying to find out when the other foot was going to drop. It was very possible that there'd be a 3-hour buffer before the next wave of trials. Maybe that was the true reason for the time limit? In that case, he should probably focus on traveling as far up the mountain as he could during this grace period. There's no need to be so hostile, Kiza said with a smile. Shouldn't we all be working together? Coming from the same direction like this, It must be fate, don't you think? Lionel's instinct was to say that he had no interest in working with these people, but he paused for a moment, looking Kiza in the eye. He needed to widen his network, and becoming friends with a network of geniuses was a good start. The issue was that if Y's Star Order could so easily pick out the Gamine and Libra families like he had before, then that meant that these three were from very prominent families. The likelihood, then, that they had a relationship of some sort with the Morales was very high. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. This meant one of two things. Either they had already fallen in line with one of Lionel's competitors, or if they hadn't, it was very likely that such families didn't get involved with the air wars at all. It had to be remembered that the only power Lionel knew of that had supported a Morales heir in the air wars was the small valiant Heart Mountain. For all he knew, then other seventh-dimensional families didn't even raise a finger for unknown political reasons. She should know I'm a member of the Morales family though. After following me for so long, she definitely saw me use Tolliver. She had likely relayed this to the other two as well. So what exactly is going on here? I'll make this as straightforward for you as possible. If you dodge the question again, I will attack. If you try to dance around the topic, I will attack. If you try to play it off as a joke again, I will attack. I don't have the time to waste here. What do you want, exactly? Kiza blinked. Her instinct really was to flirt again, but the cold indifference in Lionel's gaze made her words freeze over as well. She could tell that if she really tried it, Lionel wouldn't hesitate to attack just like he said. Plus, that little mink on his head. She had almost missed it entirely, something that never happened with her level of senses. There's no need to waste any more time, Kiza. Doing things your way isn't working. Juan spoke evenly. Your method of clearing spatial bristle bushes, we want it. In addition, I know for a fact you have at least a few hundred spatial bristle rings. But you only gave away 2. The rest of them, we want them as well. If you make this easy, we can go in opposite directions from here on. If you don't, we'll not only continue to waste your time, but we'll make certain that after we leave, your forward progress won't be nearly as smooth. Juan hadn't even finished half his words, yet when Lionel had already vanished, his spear appearing above Kiza's head. However, his blade went right through her. It was an illusion. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 1305. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 49 seconds p.m. Chapter 1305. Probe? If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1305. Probe? Lionel's gaze narrowed as he landed on the branch Kiza had been on. He looked from left to right, but the two brothers had also vanished. A probe? This woman likes to play too many games. Lionel shot forward, ignoring everything else. He didn't even bother to try and find where their real bodies were. He didn't care. All he cared about was making it to the next checkpoint. Why did you make us do that? Fuck. Now he probably thinks we're afraid of him. Droid almost threw a fit, but this was as much as he dared to do around Kiza without going overboard. The truth was that the strength of the two brothers, even individually, was no weaker than that of Kiza. The trouble lay in the fact that she simply wasn't the kind of enemy you wanted to make. Even if you could overpower her, the way you might lose could be very different from what you could expect. In fact, years could have passed, you could have long since forgotten how it was you had offended her in the first place, and it was exactly then she would choose to strike, when you least expected. The two brothers had seen her do this all too often, and they had no intention of becoming her next victim. With her abilities, she was too good at torturing people. Fighting here wouldn't be a very good idea. We should be using this grace period to travel up the mountain as fast as we can. Plus, I have a feeling that his methods aren't ones we can easily replicate. His skill as a force crafter is very high and I can see a strong spatial affinity on him, things none of us have. It's very likely that he relied on these gifts to deal with those bushes. That doesn't mean we couldn't have robbed him. If we were going to rob him, why do it now? Why not wait until he's accumulated more wealth? Plus, robbing him at all might not be a good idea. I get a very dangerous feeling from him. And his little girlfriend isn't a pushover either. Her mental coercion isn't weaker than mine despite not having a technique to funnel its usage. This chapter upload first at Novel.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novel.next. To experience faster update speed. The two brothers looked toward one another. There was nothing little about her. But they had no intention of correcting Kiza for fear of their lives and their family jewels. If there are so many roadblocks, we might as well just pick a different direction. Why are you so insistent? Because he's a Morales, of course. Despite saying this in her mind, for whatever reason, Kiza didn't say this aloud to the two boys. There wasn't really a point in keeping it a secret either, considering, by the end of this true selection, there wouldn't be a single soul who was unaware, but she still wanted to keep it to herself at least for the moment. Mother is such a smart woman, but she was actually so infatuated with a playboy. Even father's death didn't fill her with as much emotion as the information that that man's son was coming. Of course, that's probably because father's death was because of her. Kiza giggled to herself, not seeming like a woman with such a complex family life at all. It was clear that she didn't respect her father in the slightest. His life and his death wasn't enough to move the needle for her one way or the other. Unfortunately, I can't observe that man personally. But you as his son, actually has such an obedient little beauty by your side. Maybe, you've picked up something from being born of that man. I really want to see what it is about your bloodline that makes women swoon. A cold light danced within Kiza's gaze. She hadn't even realized it, but her smile had disappeared. Lionel had no idea that his father's past escapades had already given him two major problems to deal with. First Asena, now this Kiza. Trouble was that at least Asena was limited in what she could do. Helping Orinik spread rumors about him was about all that she could accomplish. But Kiza was definitely a far more direct and immediate threat, especially given her charm. Without her, the twins would have already given up this pursuit. But due to her, they had chosen to linger in the shadows. The worst part was that if Kiza could find the Libra brothers from a completely different village, she could most definitely find Lionel. Lionel, however, wasn't thinking about any of this. As expected, the route forward was extraordinarily easy. He poured everything he had into his speed, running across the treetops and across the ground depending on the situation. This chapter upload first at Novel.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novel.next. To experience faster update speed. Whenever he spotted a spatial bristle bush, he would immediately take advantage. His efficiency was even greater than it had been in the past, but because he was moving forward rather than checking locations with wide enough clearings to accommodate one, his harvest was much less. By the end of the 3 hours mark, he had recouped about half of the void points he had spent. If he was allowed to keep going, he would definitely be able to make it all back and more, but Lionel had a feeling that things wouldn't be so simple. And he was proven correct almost immediately. Without fail, the instant Lionel realized the 3-hour mark was up, a pillar of blinding light fell from the skies. Lionel's gaze flickered, his body trying to think of a method to go around it. But he realized that all he had time to do was come to a grinding halt. Lionel just barely managed to stop, his nose halting a half-foot before the barrier. Quite quickly, though, much like previously, it began to shrink. Soon, all that was left was a swirling portal barely taller than Lionel. A subdimensional zone? Nothing here was a coincidence. This entire space was locked. Clearly, Lionel was being told that his only option was to step into it. Without a choice, Lionel leapt in with Aina on his back. It seemed he would have to quickly clear this zone. Even as his vision blurred, Lionel had already flipped his palm to reveal the silver disc-shaped dictionary. It was still the best zone analysis treasure he had, and he trusted his father wouldn't let him down. However, almost instantly Lionel panicked and put the dictionary away. Damn it, old man. You couldn't make the dictionary resistant to anarchic force? And isn't this a zone? Why is there still anarchic force here at all? Lionel's frown set in deeply. How was he supposed to analyze the missions of this subdimensional zone properly without a zone analysis treasure? Chapter 1306. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 48 seconds p.m. Chapter 1306. Nothing if audio player doesn't work. Press stop then play button again. Chapter 1306. Nothing the moment Lionel landed. His brows furrowed in confusion. This was mostly because not a single thing seemed different. The grayish-black, coarse ground was the same. The thick black trees were the same. The dense fog and the gray skies were all the same. Lionel had expected to be transported into an all-new world. But it seemed that that wouldn't be the case? No. That's the wrong way of thinking about things. Every zone is technically just a projection of the history of the land it was born in. If this is the history of the Void Palace, it just means that this region hasn't changed at all in a very long time. Lionel felt that this made sense, but there was still something that just felt wrong. With how long the Void Palace had existed for, how could its subdimensional zones had not all been cleared already? And if they took the route of Valiant Heart Mountain and used special means to keep this zone open, then the time that had passed should have long since mutated this world beyond recognition. Or at the very least, it shouldn't have been so identical. Lionel then thought of the possibility that the devices the Void Palace would have access to would be beyond that of Valiant Heart Mountain. Maybe it was the case, then, that their ability to maintain a zone within a normal range was superior. But Lionel didn't linger on this idea for too long because the Valiant Pillars, in the first place, were a treasure gifted to Valiant Heart Mountain to begin with. It would be foolish for Lionel to draw conclusions about its quality, just because of who now owned it. With a thought, Lionel's internal sight stretched outward. However, even in looking, he couldn't find any oddities. The segmented cube can't hide the existence of people from a zone, so I've essentially entered with 6 people. I have a feeling that that could be a problem. The zone had made no attempt at limiting the number of individuals who had entered. Up until now, actually, the Void Palace had made no effort to stop teamwork either. But Lionel didn't believe that this would continue forever. Or more accurately, there would probably come harsher and harsher penalties for choosing to take this approach. Staying still won't get me anywhere. This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novelnext.com to experience faster update speed. With this thought, Lionel shot forward once again, his mind scanning through everywhere he passed. But he had hardly taken a third step when he suddenly felt a cold shiver rip its way up his spine. Without the slightest hesitation, Lionel dove to the side, slamming the ground with a palm and flipping himself upward until he could land on his feet again. Shoo! Pung! Yip! Yip! Lionel's pupils constricted. What looked like a silver needle with a length of 2 feet and a thinness of barely a centimeter impaled a tree, having just barely missed the side of Lionel's ear. Lionel slowed his breathing, his heart beating slow and steady. But the shock waves in his mind continued to roll like waves. That attack, it had managed to pierce the tree? Even now, Lionel wasn't certain if he could leave even a scratch on one of these trees without bringing his quasi-life-grade bow out. But even if he did, he had no certainty of accomplishing what this needle had. Of course, it had a certain advantage because of how thin it was, but it was also because of this that it was so shocking. Such a fragile piece of metal had actually managed to ram into something so hard without crumpling. Lionel's internal sight stretched out once again, but he found absolutely nothing. However, now that he knew that there was something there, he realized there were only 2 explanations instantaneously. The first was that this person had targeted him from outside the range of 100 meters. The second was that this person could hide from his internal sight. Regardless of what the answer was though, he was still Lionel. Even as he was still dodging, Lionel had already calculated the direction the needle had come from. His free hand grabbed at the air, forming a radiant core and allowing a dreadful amount of bow force to rotate about it like a drill. This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novelnext.com to experience faster update speed. Falling through the air, he spun, whipping his arm backward. Lionel had no way of telling exactly how far away this individual targeting him was. However, there was one thing about this environment that was in his favor. The trees. Even with the power of the needle, it had only managed to pierce into the tree by about 3 inches. And Lionel hadn't picked up the sound of it going through any trees before it. That meant that wherever this person was, They needed a clear line of sight between themselves and Lionel. In addition, because Lionel hadn't sensed the use of bow force, nor had the needle seemed to deviate, it was most likely that it had followed a perfectly straight path. Taking all of this into account, and adding on to it some other small tidbits of sensory information, Lionel had made a decision. This person wasn't further than 100 meters away. They were just capable of hiding from his internal sight. 87% likelihood that they stand right there. Bang! Bang! 2 sounds. Lionel landed nimbly on the ground, sliding his feet quickly and ducking behind a tree trunk. If it had just landed on ground, there wouldn't have been 2 sounds. It was more likely than not that this individual had been forced to attack twice to dispel Lionel's attack. But if that was the case, it means they can't casually use the strength they had to impale the tree. Lionel's figure flickered, rocketing toward the direction of the noise. The closer he was, the more control of the situation he would have. At least he would be able to lay eyes on who he was fighting. Since this individual knew he could find them once, they'd be more cautious the next time. However, that was when something unexpected happened. Wise Star Order actually spoke unprompted. The young truly fear nothing. Chapter 1307. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 46 seconds p.m. Chapter 1307. Rapax. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1307. Rapax. Lionel's expression changed when he heard this. He knew that the old man was definitely talking about him. Or else why would he bother to say something? Lionel was also well aware that the old man only spoke without prompt when he was either passionate about something, or he would lose out from Lionel doing something stupid. Clearly, this was the latter. If Lionel fell here, they would be stuck in a subdimensional zone. Even if Wise Star Order could then clear it himself, he would end up stuck in a place like the Void Palace, all while severely weakened. In such a case, there would only be 2 possibilities. He would either die a horrible death, or he would become a pawn. Obviously, he couldn't let Lionel just go giving up his life. Lionel was able to grasp this in just a split moment, but he still didn't understand why. Was this person really so dangerous? Despite not knowing the answer, Lionel's steps didn't falter. In fact, his forward speed became even faster. Without the slightest hesitation, he went all out. His bronze runes blossomed into existence, the crown of his spear domain lineage factor protruding from his head once more even as the halo of his metal synergy lineage factor enveloped his body. The crackles of ice danced through the air like shimmering mist as Lionel burst through the final clearing. The gorgeous silver and sky blue armor coated him from head to toe even as his wings spread out from his body. Running away would have been a foolish option. He still believed that an enemy that could hide from his internal sight was too dangerous to keep at a distance, especially when it had such powerful long-ranged abilities. In that case, the only option was to not take this meeting lightly. He would give it everything he had. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext. Com to experience faster update speed. Lionel's beast skin armor was the last to erupt. The dancing dichotomy of bright silvers and blues to deep and dark blacks creating a gorgeous cinematic image. But what Lionel saw on the other side of the clearing was anything but. It wasn't a person targeting him at all. Rather, it was an alien, almost insect-like creature. It stood on digitigrade legs with claws so long they could have each been their own individual curved blades. Its head was an oblong shape, warped like a pill with its mouth protruding forward, and the back of its skull doing the same in the reverse direction. Its head, though, was encased by a silver metallic shell, hiding its eyes away and only revealing a mouth that split open both vertically and horizontally to reveal glistening canines. The metallic frame of the shell that covered the top half of its pill-shaped head traveled down its back, quickly losing its whole look and twisting into the shape of what looked like a real spine that eventually curved into a scorpion-like tail. The entire monstrosity stood at over 3 meters tall despite its hunched posture. Lionel could feel so much hidden power within his body that the numbers for what its top speed must be flew past his eyes, becoming bigger and bigger with every new parameters taken into account. What the hell is this alien from Alien vs. Predator Real? In this sort of life and death situation, Lionel truly did have such an immature thought. The reality, though, was that aside from the general shape of their bodies, this thing and alien were nothing alike. Even just by danger level alone, this monstrosity was on a whole different level. Lionel hadn't even landed on the ground, yet when a whipping tail suddenly attacked his head. With a thought, Lionel immediately activated his dark ice domain. While his spear domains were still too lacking, his dark ice domain was still at a 6th-dimensional standard. Though it wasn't as powerful as it was on planet Luxnix, Lionel could just barely over a 5-meter radius. That was just enough to slow the tail about to rip his head off for him to dodge backward, his expression becoming serious. This thing was strong. Very strong. Far stronger than even the version of Miguel Lionel had fought just a few months ago. What the hell is this thing, old man? This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novelnext.com to experience faster update speed thing? That's a living, breathing being. You sound like a racist bigot. Of all the answers he was ready for, this was the only one that could have caught him completely off guard. If Lionel wasn't so good at splitting his minds, he might have been nailed to death by that damn tail. Can you be serious, please? I am being serious. This is a Rapax. They're a race of people just like you humans, and they happen to share a border with your human domain. Lionel's expression flickered, his spear swinging up to clash against a strong kick by the Rapax. However, the end result was him being sent flying backward, his feet eventually gliding against the ground hard. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? They have extraordinarily powerful bodies. Even that needle that it used to attack you didn't utilize any force at all. At least not in a conventional sort of way. They've also evolved to be completely invulnerable to mental attacks. It's a speciality of their natural metallic carapaces. It's also because of that your internal sight couldn't spot it. It gives them a huge advantage in this dense fog. Clang. 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 The Rapax displayed a dexterity Lionel thought he would never find in a sequence of kicks. Each felt like a heavy mountain pressing down on him. If not for his own sturdy defenses and powerful body, Lionel would have found him being battered and broken already. It's odd though. Usually, the Void Palace wouldn't throw something like this at the new recruits so quickly. Must be because you entered with too many people. Wise Star Order chuckled even as Lionel continued to grunt. Chapter 1308. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 44 seconds p.m. Chapter 1308. Runeless. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1308. Runeless. Lionel immediately found himself to be at a great disadvantage. The Rapax was stronger, faster, and its defenses felt impenetrable. Its naturally formed armor was already stronger than and more resistant to blades than most weapons Lionel had come across to this point. But this was only a small part of the issue. In Lionel's battle with Miguel, he had purposely chosen not to use his ability index. He had wanted to have a fun and blood-boiling battle. And quite frankly, he didn't believe he would have struggled very much at all if he used his calculative abilities to force the latter into a corner. However, because his internal sight was useless against the Rapax, it made Lionel feel that even if he wanted to use his ability index, he couldn't. Whenever he tried to lock onto the Rapax, it was as though he had locked onto thin air. He couldn't read and calculate its movements, he couldn't sense its flow of force, he couldn't even tell what emotions it was feeling right now or if Rapax even experienced the same range of emotions humans did. Without the ability to do this, Lionel could only calculate his own movements. But because he could only use his eyes to monitor the Rapax, not to mention the fact he wasn't familiar with its anatomy at all to begin with, the result was just him repeatedly retreating. It also didn't help that this was the first kicking expert Lionel had ever fought before. He didn't even have a human frame of reference, let alone one for a Rapax. Lionel couldn't even tell what tier this Rapax was at. For all he knew, this creature was still in the 3rd dimension, giving him all the trouble he could possibly ask for. Luckily, the trees around him were like absolute defenses. Or so Lionel thought until Lionel continued to shoot backward, mapping out a path to his back. His steps were nimble and his gaze was cold. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net if you want to read more chapters, please visit Novel Next. Calm to experience faster update speed, he ducked behind another tree, and that was exactly when it happened. Losing its patience, the Rapax kicked out anyway. As though a knife through butter, its curved claws split the side of a black tree into four, shooting for Lionel's head and appearing before him in the blink of an eye. Lionel's pupils constricted. He had been leaning his head to one side of the tree to begin with, because he had to keep an eye on the Rapax at all times. If he failed to do so, there was no telling if it would find a way to vanish outside the line of his sight. Unfortunately, that caution allowed just enough of his head to be exposed to the side. The Rapax shouldn't have had the angle to harm him. But who would have thought that it would go through the tree itself? Lionel released a low shout, his dark ice domain multiplying in strength as he fell back. The slow in the Rapax speed was just enough for him to slip out of the way. However, the Rapax was relentless. It quickly stamped its originally kicking foot onto the ground, using the momentum to spin and lift its other leg into the air. It was baffling that a creature that had just displayed such poor posture could actually raise its legs up in a perfect split, prepared to axe kick Lionel's body into a bloody pulp. Lionel's expression flickered. Aina was on his back and she would take a devastating blow even if he blocked this. But with the speed and relentless pursuit of the Rapax, he wasn't even sure if there was another path to take. No, I can't let myself be pinned down, Lionel thought as he fell backward. His gaze locked onto the falling axe kick. The moment I do and this thing attacks with its tail again, it's over. This was Lionel's first encounter with a non-human race. Well, if he ignored the oryx, beasts and Yuri. But regardless, this was his first true battle with one. And the difference was almost despairing. This Rapax hadn't used any special techniques. It hadn't used its ability index or lineage factor. It didn't even seem to be trying very hard. On top of that, Lionel was certain that as cruel as the Void Palace was, it wouldn't present an enemy that couldn't be defeated. Even if this enemy had appeared because Lionel had entered as a group of 6, that would mean that the Void Palace was saying that 6 human geniuses was only worth 1 Rapax. Tell me the truth, old man. What tier is this Rapax in? Despite the desperate situation, Lionel suddenly became frighteningly calm, his gaze placid as he watched the descending foot even as he himself fell backward. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net if you want to read more chapters, please visit Novel Next. Calm to experience faster update speed. You see those spurs on its metallic tail? Upon entering the 4th dimension, a Rapax will finally grow its tail. Upon entering the 5th, its tail will gain a blade. For every tier upward it goes within the 5th dimension, it will gain a pair of metallic spurs. Lionel's gaze narrowed. The Rapax had 4 spurs. It was in tier 3 of the 5th dimension. I should also probably mention that this Rapax is runeless. So it's at most a mass-produced foot soldier. This Rapax is the lowest common denominator of their race. You see how far the gap is yet? Lionel didn't say anything to this, his gaze only growing indifferent to the point its coldness returned. It was right then that a frightening crimson erupted from within his irises. A fiendish grin spread across Lionel's face. A king losing to a foot soldier, huh? The tendrils of darkness to Lionel's back shot out, grabbing onto 2 trees and pulling hard. Lionel's falling figure was whipped back like a rock out of a slingshot, his gaze only growing more fiendish. Let's do this, alien. The foggy darkness around Lionel grew several-fold. In one instant, the forest seemed silent. In the next, an eruption of dark tendrils splintered off in all directions, connecting all the trees in the surroundings in a complex web of black strings. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 1309. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 42 seconds p.m. Chapter 1309. Revolve around me. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1309. Revolve around me. Seemingly feeling Lionel's battle intent, the Rapax howled, billowing steam jetting out from its pores and causing its silver natural armor to tinge with red. With a step, It immediately tore through the tendrils that Lionel had blanketed the forest Indiana. But just as quickly as it did so, more swarmed to replace them. Lionel reached to his back. Tapping Aina with the finger glove form of the segmented cube, he sent her inside. He wasn't sure if he could trust himself to not harm her with what he was about to do. His hair billowed in the wind, his body crouching atop a branch as the Rapax barreled toward him. The spear domain crown glowed a brighter and brighter shade of gold above his forehead, pulsing strands of bronze, violet and crimson jetting out from his body. Lionel's body erupted with flames, his body becoming enveloped by a smoldering heat that clashed and fought against the oppressive cold of his dark ice armor. Releasing a steamy breath, his irises were almost completely taken over by a red gold. Destruction. Lionel vanished. Almost the instant he did, the branch he had just been standing up crumbled to nothing more than ash. When he appeared again, his spear was nowhere to be seen, but his fist was not to be denied, flashing before the chest of the Rapax like a falling meteor. Scree! Clang! The Rapax's tail lashed out, slapping Lionel's fist away with its blade. However, in a clash of metal on metal, they both rebounded against one another. The Rapax's tail whipped backward to prepare for another strike, even as it raised its leg to kick out at the retreating Lionel. However, it found its progress hindered by numerous tendrils of darkness. At the same time, Lionel had already smashed a foot into the ground, stopping his backward progress and shooting forward like a blazing star. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. Bang! 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 Having lost its balance due to the entanglement of its tail, the Rapax could only use its arms and one knee to block Lionel's torrent of punches. However, there was something different about these compared to Lionel's previous strikes. They hurt. The Rapax was pushed backward, but it found its retreat slowed by Lionel's dark ice domain. With quick strikes, Lionel tapped at the air 3 times. Violent slashing arcs of fire-infused spear force jetted outward, aiming perfectly for the joints of the Rapax, which remained unprotected by its natural armor. Lionel's fighting style remained fluid, filled with pace and a relentless pursuit. It was clear that the improvements he had gained to his spearmanship had followed his overall style, giving his every action an air of purpose, calculation and wisdom. Scree! The Rapax shrieked, greenish-blue blood flying as its tough skin was cut into. However, Lionel was completely unsatisfied with this result. His spear force layered with radiant force on top of his comprehensions of destruction had only caused so little damage. He wanted more. He needed to see more blood. The joints of Lionel's dark ice armor erupted with billowing flames. If it wasn't for the fact his head was covered by a helmet and a visor, it would have been possible to see that it wasn't just it that had been bathed in fire. Lionel's eyebrows, his hair, even the corner of his mouth shot out with flickering silver-red flames, looking every bit the part of a demon risen from hell. In that moment, even the tendrils of darkness suddenly gained a wild fire rushing through them, the shards of broken space that hung in the air reflecting gorgeous violet lights. Everywhere the Rapax tried to step and move, it found itself swarmed by corrosive flames from all sides. As its injuries grew, the effect of the heat on it only grew, its shrieking only becoming more and more prominent. Lionel was relentless. He took a heavy step forward, blocking a strong leg kick of the Rapax with 2 forearms. He planted a foot hard and sent his other sweeping at the side of the Rapax's planted knee. Bang! This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. Almost instantly, the Rapax buckled. It reached out with its tail to pierce the ground for balance, but it was once again thwarted by the endless tendrils of darkness laced about the trees around him. Lionel took another heavy step forward, taking advantage of the Rapax lost momentum to send out a strong punch to its chest. Bang! The Rapax fell back, slamming heavily to the ground and falling through a swath of flame-laced dark tendrils. It suddenly found its body completely encased from all sides. It had been able to snap 1, 2 and even 10 tendrils easily. But what about hundreds? What about thousands? Scree! Even fallen, the Rapax's lethal claws whipped out at Lionel, its long legs still seeking out the kill. However, without proper leverage, the strength behind it was at best a tenth of its peak. With a savage spear force lace swiped downward, Lionel clashed with the upward swinging claw, smashing them right back into the ground and leaping atop the tied-down Rapax. Lionel's gaze blazed, his palm rising into the air. An enormous radiant core formed. But this time, it was laced with a destructive will. Bang! Lionel's armor expanded by a size before shrinking, numerous tiny cracks spreading across its surface before rapidly healing. An implosion of universal force and a sudden change to his body fueled it all. A spontaneous rise in energy almost spinning out of his control. In that moment, Lionel only had one thought: that everything should revolve around him. His blade, his enemy's life and death, the world. Everything was in the palm of his hand, let alone a mere foot soldier. Even the king of Rapax wouldn't stop his momentum forward. He was a star. The feeling of the heavenly body realm's comprehension enveloped Lionel from all sides, fueling a spinning drill of spear force. Die. Shoo. TSSSSS. Boom. Lionel raised his head up to the skies, releasing a roar that traveled dozens of miles. Chapter 1310. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 40 seconds p.m. Chapter 1310. Fusion. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1310. Fusion. Look at this brat, roaring at the top of his lungs as though he's actually accomplished something. Even I feel embarrassed. Wise Star Order clicked his tongue, shaking his head. Lionel exhaled a long, billowing breath, pretending as though he hadn't heard a single thing the old man said. Maybe it was a bit silly that he had reacted like this after defeating a being 2 tiers below him, but he was excited nonetheless. With a thought, Lionel quickly placed the Rapax corpse within a snow globe and let the flames, his runes and his armor slowly retreating into his body. Lionel's mind was already swimming with thoughts of how to use the Rapax corpse. But the truth was that he had only placed it within the snow globe just now so that the zone couldn't recognize that he had won just yet. Though he was on a time crunch, Lionel still wanted a moment to take a breather. The segmented cube shot off of Lionel's finger and expanded. Then he disappeared within it. In the skies, Cornelius gazed upon the images flashing before him, unsure of what to say or think for a long while. This chapter upload first at NovelBin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. His shock wasn't exactly related to the defeat of the Rapax. If there weren't at least some humans who could defeat Rapax on their own, what hope or chance would the human domain have had in lasting so long? The main issue was that upon a first encounter, things shouldn't have gone so easily. Could it be that Velasco prepared him for this as well? Cornelius had no idea what sort of parenting practices Val used. He had already been shocked enough that Spear Domain and the segmented cube were actually in Lionel's hands. Anyone seeing such a thing would think that Lionel had been pampered and handed everything on a silver platter. At that point, the idea that Lionel had had targeted training to prepare for this day wasn't so far-fetched. But this was exactly where the cognitive dissonance came in. If Lionel was supposedly prepared ahead of time for all of this, what was with the first half of the fight? Why did he seem like a deer in headlights? Was that just an act? Cornelius didn't believe that a boy could fool his eyes so well, especially not one who seemingly had as hot a temper as Lionel. And that also led to another. That roar of pure emotion, linked with that final breakthrough. It made Cornelius feeling that it was impossible for Lionel to have experience in this matter. Putting all of this together, Cornelius felt that if he had to answer with his life on the line, he would choose to say that this was the very first time Lionel had ever come across a Rapax. Lionel knew that there was a likelihood that he was being watched, so he chose to enter the segmented cube. Though he wasn't absolutely certain, he felt there was a good chance that whatever monitoring the Void Palace had left behind wouldn't be able to penetrate across this barrier. The Rapax make such good soldiers. If the tentacle womb could replicate them. Lionel's expression flickered, but Wise Star Order's words danced at the back of his mind, making him feel somewhat conflicted. Ultimately, the Rapax, although they looked different from humans, were a group of people too. Mass-producing them felt wrong, even if it wasn't possible. something Lionel wasn't absolutely sure of just yet. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. However, if Lionel thought about it, wasn't it the same for beasts? They might have been unintelligent in the third dimension, but could the same be said now? He could feel the complexity of Blackstar's thoughts every day. He had seen the kind of devious and well-laid-out plans the golden-scaled koi fish had made. How could he still, with a straight face, say that beasts were different? And yet, wasn't he trying to mass-produce them either way? It might not be necessary to worry about such a moral dilemma. After the tentacle womb had absorbed Monkey's ability, it had undergone a qualitative change. In fact, it was so extensive and wide-ranging that Lionel had actually left the dictionary to analyze it over several months. Though there was a small pause in that when he took it out to analyze to the subdimensional zone. It should be about finished by now. In that time, Lionel had grasped tidbits of its abilities here and there. From what he had learned, it was very possible that he wouldn't have to worry about it at all. The fundamental change that Lionel was the most excited for was the fact that the tentacle womb would no longer need multiple samples of the same DNA to replicate it properly. It had to be remembered that when two ability indexes fused, the result wasn't additive, and it wasn't necessarily exponential either. Rather, an average of the two abilities would be added then divided in two. The result would then be a perfect reflection of both original abilities. This was why Lionel couldn't just randomly absorb any strong ability he came across even if he now had the silver tablet. Though Lionel thought that the fusion of Monkey's doubling ability and the tentacle womb's duplication ability would work well together, he wouldn't have definitive proof of this until he saw the results. And at least for this first portion, he wasn't disappointed. In the past, the tentacle womb had to have many samples. The more powerful the creature, the more samples of it were needed. But the fallacy in this was clear. How could it be so easy to find so many powerful creatures? And, even if you did, how could they all possibly share the same ability? Due to this, Lionel felt investing in the tentacle womb would be a poor use of resources. He could create crafts that were far more useful. But now, after gaining a portion of Monkey's doubling ability, the tentacle womb only needed a single complete sample. Then, it could replicate it as many times as it needed to meet its goals. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 1311. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 39 seconds p.m. Chapter 1311. Multipliers. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1311. Multipliers. Lionel silently listened to the detailed analysis of the dictionary. When it was done, he nodded and organized his thoughts. It wasn't perfect, but he hadn't expected it to be. He was lucky enough to have a combination of treasures that could allow it to work, but he wouldn't believe himself to be infallible. With how large the dimensional verse was, if it was so easy to make it to the top, then Lionel would already have a chance at becoming king. Someone else would already have a combination of treasures far better than himself, not to mention an elite head start. The replication requires energy, a lot of it. The only reason Monkey felt so undefeatable was because all his strength was provided by the dimensional verse, since he was a savant. However, the tentacle womb has lost the savant nature it had after the fusion. So all the energy now needs to be provided by me. This was the most troubling part. The amount of energy required was astronomical. It was somewhat better since Lionel had the koi fish and the silver tablet, not to mention the segmented cube. But even then it was heart-rending. Lionel hadn't even spent any money yet, but he already felt poor. Depending on what the tentacle womb was replicating, it would require a different collection of force sources. However, after calculating it all, the amounts were fairly consistent. The replication of a third-dimensional existence would take a single third-dimension pure force crystal. The replication of a fourth-dimensional existence would take 10, a fifth 100, a sixth would require 1,000, and a seventh was currently impossible. In addition to this, there was a multiplier effect added on top of this. A Tier 1 ability was a x1 multiplier, a Tier 2 ability was x2, a Tier 3 was a x5, a Tier 4 was a x10, and a Tier 5 was a x100, not to mention requiring an equivalent amount of breaking force pure crystals. If that was the only multiplier, things might still be fine. But of course it wasn't. Then came the scale for lineage factors. Fourth-dimensional lineage factor came with a base multiplier of x2, fifth-dimensional lineage factors were x5, sixth-dimensional were x10, and seventh-dimensional lineage factors couldn't be replicated. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed than there were innate nodes. This made things even more complicated. There were two categories to consider. One was the rarity of the force and the second was its inherent ranking. Within the first category of rarity, there were 4 tiers. Bottom tier forces like normal elements of wind, fire and like without special add-ons or abilities. Middle tier forces that could be considered a step beyond like light elemental and dark elemental forces. There were then high tier forces like space elemental and dream force. And finally, there were the pinnacle forces. These included fusion forces like Lionel's Scarlet Star Force, and it also touched upon forces that existed on planes of their own like anarchic force, universal force and breaking force. To form an innate node of the bottom tier, it would require x10 multiplier, middle would require x100, and high tie would require x1000. As for pinnacle tier, it was currently impossible. These multipliers only became worse when the individual ranking of the innate node was taken into consideration. This was already an overwhelming amount of information to take in. But there was a reason the dictionary had taken so long to analyze everything. Because there was even more, and these might even be more important than the previously mentioned parameters. These parameters were related to the sentience and overall constitution of the replicated creature. It didn't matter how much talent you stuffed into a clone if they had the intelligence of a toddler. And it definitely didn't matter if the materials they were constructed of were simply too fragile. Toward this end, the tentacle womb had the ability to assign a level of intelligence. This ranged from empty vessel to low IQ, middle IQ, high IQ, and fully sentient. An empty vessel would only be useful for the likes of Wise Star Order and Era, who could ditch their bodies and pick up a new one at their leisure. Such a creation would be absolutely useless to Lionel, who needed an army of actual soldiers. Unsurprisingly, the multiplier for this was just x1. The low IQ variant was a measure better, but not by much. It only had the ability to sustain itself and work on instinct. It could feel hunger, and its body knew how to pump its blood and move its heart. But this was all. This came with a multiplier of x2. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. The middle IQ variant was basically the minimum requirement for a decent soldier. Though they couldn't have complex thoughts of their own, they could follow orders. They could attack when they were told and retreat when they were told. This came with a multiplier of x5. The high IQ variant, though, was likely the lowest Lionel felt was actually possible. Their thoughts weren't overly complex, but they could also follow orders. In addition, they could begin to display some battle prowess of their own, and could display skill in the usage of their bodies. Most importantly, though, variants of this level gain the ability to learn and retain information. This came with a x10 multiplier. The final level spoke for itself, but it was unfortunately impossible for the tentacle womb to do this. Or, depending on the way you looked at it, it might be for the best. Finally, there was the constitution of the construct. Clones tended to have far shorter lifespans and far less durability than real living beings. Just healing from a middle-tier injury could shave years off their already short lives. However, the tentacle womb could actually combat this. At the first tier, a clone would have a lifespan of 6 months. At the second, it would be 1 year, then 2, then 5, then 10 at the highest. In addition, those with the highest constitution could be recycled and produce a new unit at less than a fraction of the original cost. Unsurprisingly, these also came with ridiculous multipliers. The first level was x1, then x2, then x10, then x100 and finally x1000. With all of this laid out, if Lionel wanted to replicate just one of these Raypax foot soldiers, it would take It would cost 1 million fifth-dimensional pure force crystals. And that's assuming it had a Tier 1 ability index, no lineage factor, and no innate node. Lionel exhaled a breath. Chapter 1312. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 37 seconds p.m. Chapter 1312. Deity. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1312. Deity. Lionel had tried forming a pure force crystal for several months previously, but he had failed to form even a single one. Not a single one. How was he supposed to gather 1 million under these conditions? He wouldn't even know where to begin. Luckily, he didn't have to worry about this alone for long. Hey old man, come to Lab 001 for a second. Lionel didn't speak loudly, but he controlled everything with the segmented cube. With a thought, his voice would be projected anywhere he wanted it. Wise Star Order had been within his segmented cube the whole time, having fun with his new favorite toys, or rather disciples. This was good though, as it seemed that Candle and Vice were actually doing much better. Not long after Lionel called out, all three came into the lab to find the enormous tentacle womb looming within a glass case. Candle and Vice weren't allowed into the lab setting usually, so this was only the second time they were seeing the tentacle womb after they first fought it. Candle almost immediately hid behind Wise Star Order, shrinking herself down to the point it seemed she might want to vanish completely. Though this was much better than her panic-producing hundreds of impenetrable barriers. Despite Candle's reaction, the current tentacle womb actually looked much better than it did in the past, and even seemed to be tending toward a more aesthetically pleasing variance. Its bottom half was still as grotesque as ever, a vine network of slimy, grayish, purplish, blackish tentacles, protecting the exit of its womb. However, its upper half had become a budding flower with more layers and petals than most could care to count, and sharing the very same color scheme. The mind of the tentacle womb was hidden within, and there was actually the face of a beautiful woman that took up the center of the bud. The face was an inhuman sort of beautiful, the kind that felt computer-generated. Due to this, despite the fact it was objectively more beautiful than any face Lionel had ever seen, including his mother and Aina's, it still didn't truly feel like it was. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. It also obviously didn't help that the face appeared in such an odd location. That said, Lionel could imagine that as the tentacle womb finished its evolution, it would grow into its own and likely finish what was likely just the beginning stages of its maturation. What did you call me here for? I have questions, of course. What are your thoughts on pure force crystals? Rare in the human domain. Wise Star Order replied. In the human domain? Why specifically in the human domain? Pure force crystals are the representation of purity. They follow just one path and are dead set on it. In the human domain, there are too many disciples, not enough unified thought, too much free thinking. It's not an environment conducive to the appearance of pure force crystals. Lionel's brow furrowed. The way Wise Star Order talked about things seemed simple, but they were laced with profound meanings far beyond his comprehension. He spoke of the creation of an inanimate object as though it hinged on what the animate did. In the past, Lionel might have already dismissed this as absolutely ridiculous. But he had learned enough from Wise Star Order by now to understand how it all came together. The introduction of the life grade to him opened up a whole new door. And when he felt the last dying wish of his craft's quill, he realized just how tangible that reality was. At that point, these matters didn't feel so ridiculous to him at all, and he had even accepted them wholeheartedly. Then let me guess, the spirituals have the highest concentration of pure force crystals there is? I guess the answer to that is both yes and no. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. How so? Well, specific tribes of spirituals would have very specific stores of pure force crystals, namely elemental ones. But they might not necessarily have others. Those will be left mostly to other races. What about the Raypaks? They're a good example. Their natural armor makes the density of defense-specific pure force crystals especially high. In addition, They have a large variety of pure force crystals that directly benefit the body. I see. So if I need 1,000,000 fifth-dimensional force crystals, what do I do? Lionel sighed. He wanted to say that he could rely on the koi fish, but how would he do that? It had very clearly shown him its limits just a day ago when it failed to separate anarchic force from regular force. Obviously, it had its limits, and they were quite severe. Do you think him a god? Wise Star Order looked at Lionel as though he was looking at an idiot. He couldn't understand how someone could be so smart, and yet simultaneously stupid. All right, I'll take a different approach then. Lionel began to explain to Wise Star Order all the cards he had in his hands, from the tentacle womb to the koi fish, not to mention their deficiencies. With those things laid out, he waited in hopes of hearing a different answer. Of course the fish wasn't able to separate out force here. It's a fifth-dimensional existence, and you haven't spent any time nurturing it at all. This is a seventh-dimensional world. If it was already powerful enough to do as it pleased here, you think you would have been able to subdue it so easily? A koi fish with those characteristics would be like a worshipped deity in the spiritual's domain. Creatures with this ability are very rare and have elevated intelligence. How an idiot like you managed to catch one is beyond me. Also, the difficulty of forming pure force crystals is all relative. If you're in a fifth-dimensional world, especially in a region as weak as the Milky Way, of course you wouldn't form even one in several months. But if you're in a seventh-dimensional world, a single fifth-dimensional pure force crystal isn't nearly as valuable. Lionel's brows shot up. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 1313. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 35 seconds p.m. Chapter 1313. Command if audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1313. Command Wise Star Order side. This rat truly had way too much luck. How it is that things ended up this way was beyond him. But when he thought about how this koi fish had appeared on Earth, he felt like it was no wonder. I guess it makes sense for this little one to appear on Earth. Your world probably hasn't chosen one yet. There's probably a large concentration of highly talented beasts vying for it, then. Lionel's head snapped back, his dreamscape suddenly sparking wildly. A conversation he had with Uncle Montez resurfaced to his mind instantly. Montez smiled mysteriously. Every world has its own champions. The champion of the humans is the wielder of the world spirit. But when it comes to newly evolved worlds like yours, beasts are at a great disadvantage. Did you think that the universe just favored humanoid creatures? Of course beasts have their own opportunities. Whether or not you can find out more will depend on yourself and this little one. Someone once told me that a world has both human and beast champions, and that the human champion is the wielder of the world spirit. What does the beast champion get, then? Oh, you do know about this? Is it not common knowledge? Lionel was already so used to being in the dark about things that this was his instinct. But from Wise Star Order's reaction, this seemed to be unlikely. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. No. You seem to not have a grasp on even the simplest things, but then somehow understand things that almost no one does. Wise Star Order shook his head. Not every world has a beast champion, and not every world can have one to begin with. The requirements of a beast are, unfortunately, far more stringent. And usually it's quite difficult for a human as well, at least to fuse the world spirit into one. But the difference is that the beast equivalent might never appear at all while the world spirit is guaranteed to appear. Why is that? Well, there's a balance that has to be struck. There is no beast domain in the dimensional verse like there is a human domain. Beasts appear everywhere and are technically widely accepted. At the very least, beasts aren't discriminated against. Any conflict between a species and beast is usually quite pure and free of bigotry and a sense of superiority. Usually it's just a fight for resources and/or land. Due to this and other inherent advantages beasts had, it's infinitely more difficult for them to claim territory for themselves. They don't need the protection of the regulator like humanoids do. They can exist everywhere. However, beasts have no less intelligence than humanoids do. Or more accurately, a certain subset of them do. While it's technically fair for things to be like this, the regulator still allows freedom of choice, even to beasts. So, those that want more for themselves can take the route usually left to humans. It's nothing new. It's simply the birth of a second world spirit known as the world beast. I'm not too clear on the abilities considering how rare world beasts are, but I don't doubt that they share much of the same abilities the world spirit does. I see. Lionel's gaze shifted up to the little mink curled up atop his head. He hadn't thought of asking for Blackstar's help even once during his battle with the Rapax, and the little guy seemed to have the ability to sense when he wanted to do things alone. However, at that moment, Lionel couldn't help but remember the Tentacle Womb's initial evaluation of the koi fish versus little Blackstar. It deduced that the former was worth way more, until that is little Blackstar perfectly assimilated with his void beast blood. This made Lionel wonder, though, if little Blackstar in his base form was actually believed to be so much weaker than the koi fish, what other beasts were lurking in the dark on Earth waiting to become the world beast? Was the koi fish really the pinnacle? Or were there other monsters lying in wait? And if he managed to raise up little Blackstar to become the king of them all, would they obediently fall in line? Lionel's gaze narrowed. So what you mean to say is that under normal seventh-dimensional conditions, the koi fish would actually be able to produce fifth-dimensional pure force crystals very quickly? This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. Yes. But I can't leave the Void Palace. Even my mom couldn't for decades. There's anarchic force everywhere here. Lionel wasn't really speaking to Wise Star Order anymore when he said this. Rather, he was speaking to himself, trying to find a solution. It was likely that the next time he got to leave the Void Palace, he would be headed to the Morales family heir wars. That meant there was no longer any other chances to take a different direction. Would he just have to abandon the tentacle womb for now and focus on other things? It was looking like it. Haven't you noticed yet? Lionel's pupils suddenly constricted. That was right. How could he have not noticed? There's no anarchic force in here. It wasn't that Lionel wasn't sensitive to such things. It was rather that the force he could use here was just as thin as the force he could use outside, so he hadn't noticed originally. Lionel was used to the segmented cube multiplying the force concentration several times over in here, so when it hadn't, he had assumed that it was because of the anarchic force. But it seemed that he was both correct and incorrect. With a thought, Lionel could tell that the segmented cube was actually siphoning away the seventh-dimensional force to fuel its evolution. And because the anarchic force was so thick, it couldn't complete this function and increase the force concentration at the same time. It also didn't help that the region within the segmented cube was so much larger than it had been in the past. I see. Divert force from evolution and focus on maintaining high concentrations in lab setting. Lionel commanded. Almost immediately, the atmosphere began to shift. A strong gush of force flooded the region to the point Lionel suddenly felt extremely light on his feet. What he didn't know was that though the segmented cube had listened to his command, a certain little girl's spirit frowned in her sleep, her little fists waving about in a tantrum. Chapter 13-14. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 34 seconds p.m. Chapter 13-14. What is it worth? If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 13-14. What is it worth? With the change to the segmented cube, Lionel felt as though he could finally breathe. It was as though he had been taking half-breaths all this time, slowly suffocating, and he only now became aware of just how much oxygen he had been missing out on. He didn't realize how much he had missed high densities of force until now. But more shockingly, he hadn't realized just how good just breathing in a density of seventh-dimensional force felt. With a thought, Lionel's mind reached out to the golden-scaled koi fish and had it begin to work. Still scared from its previous failure, the little one was a bit hesitant at first, but quickly acclimated once realizing that the air had been thoroughly cleansed. Lionel watched this scene intently, not taking his eyes away. The true selection had suddenly taken a back seat for a moment. And to Lionel's shock, just moments later, the golden-scaled koi fish opened its little mouth, its fins still gliding through the water like thin strips of white silk. A strong surge of force formed, radiating outward with a purity hardly seen. The entire lab was covered in a pure white fog that almost made Lionel moan. And then it happened, the segmented cube whirred to life under Lionel's command. The white fog concentrated, and almost instantly began churning out pure force crystals. In just a moment, a pile of 10 had formed, and it showed no signs of stopping. There was no cohesive whole at all. Lionel could see crystals of all sorts of elements within. He knew that depending on the subject he wanted to clone, he would need to make the golden-scaled koi fish focus on very specific types of force, which would likely slow its progress greatly. But this did nothing to dampen his mood at all. This chapter upload first at NovelBin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed, just 2 seconds to form 10 fifth-dimensional pure force crystals. 2 seconds. At that sort of pace, it would only take just 2 to 3 days to form the million needed to clone 1 low-level Raypax. After a surge of excitement, Lionel forced himself to calm down. Things were finally slowly coming together, but he still couldn't get ahead of himself. There were many things that needed to be worked out. In addition, he still wasn't sure if making a bunch of clones was the best use of his resources right this moment. While it sounded like a great idea, clones were a hassle. Setting aside the moral dilemma, they had short lifespans and would require constant command to show their true potential. In addition, it had to be understood that the pure force crystals needed to create them was just an initial investment. Every clone formed would manifest at Tier 1 of the dimension they were born into. If Lionel wanted to grow their strength, he would have to feed them more force crystals. In addition, even the highest constitution the tentacle womb was capable of reproducing right now couldn't break through dimensions, meaning they would never be able to reach a new level. At least not at the tentacle womb's current level. There were all sorts of other small problems that Lionel couldn't even bother to deal with right now. It would be better if I invested everything into evolving the tentacle womb and koi fish now, leaving cloning until later. I have a feeling that fifth-dimensional clones wouldn't be helpful to me in the slightest, and I wouldn't be able to form sixth-dimensional force crystals until the koi fish entered the sixth dimension. Likewise for the tentacle womb. It can't form sixth-dimensional beings until it too enters the sixth dimension. Lionel was under no illusions that fifth-dimensional backers would be enough to win him the air wars. Not only would he need strength well into the sixth dimension, so too would his subordinates. If he got greedy now and lost his patience chasing numbers, he would be handicapping himself. Luckily, Lionel had only wanted a proof of concept for now, and he had a much better idea for what he should be focused on right this moment. With a thought, the silver tablet appeared once more. This chapter upload first at NovelBin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed within this thing. Many outstanding talents were slumbering. Not to mention Lionel's generals and especially Goggles, Lionel often found himself thinking back to the speedster and his former fiancée. Lionel had already decided. On the outside, his brothers would build up their strength and charge their way into the Void Palace. And on the inside, the core of his faction would begin with himself, Noah, Aina, the others and the geniuses slumbering within this silver tablet. It was about time that Lionel unleashed Little Blackstar. He had been sitting on the little guy's ability steel powers for long enough. First, it was because he didn't want his closest friends to lose their personalities. But now that he had the silver tablet, that was no longer a worry. Within the walls of the Void Palace, with so many geniuses around and so many chances to kill them, what better place could there be to steal abilities? Goggles, I'll awaken you first. With a thought, Lionel had the golden-scaled koi fish focus on gathering pure neutral force. Suddenly, the large and daunting amount of force he needed to gather to resurrect his brothers felt so small and insignificant now. Feeling this change, Lionel couldn't help but sigh. What was life exactly? If you could just stuff someone's soul into a tablet and resurrect them on a whim when you had enough energy, what was life worth? Was he wrong for believing it had any intrinsic value at all? And what about Camelot's existence? Did mere words on a page really give life to living, breathing people, with thoughts, emotions, and aspirations of their own? Lionel remembered how lost he had felt when he realized what secrets the silver tablet was hiding. They were emotions that he had yet to resolve even now, but the question itself was too profound. It made Lionel feel as though there were a large pair of hands hanging over him above, pulling not just him, but everyone along at its leisure. Lionel exhaled a long breath, his gaze flickering with resolution. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 13-15. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 32 seconds p.m. Chapter 13-15. Holding himself back if audio player doesn't work. Press stop then play button again. Chapter 13-15. Holding himself back, Lionel appeared outside the subdimensional zone with a Rapax beneath his feet and Aina tied to his back once more. The latter still seemed to be in an endlessly peaceful sleep, and Lionel almost felt bad for taking her away from the comfortable bed she had been lying upon before. But he had no choice. Though the segmented cube was very comfortable, it wasn't conducive to Aina's growth any longer, because the segmented cube filtered anarchic force away. If he left her in there, she wouldn't be able to acclimate, and that would only weaken her into the future. I wonder though, if the segmented cube can filter anarchic force, I bet it can selectively raise its concentration as well. I've heard that this is good for your training long term. I'll have to try it out later. Lionel had no idea just yet that with this thought, he had gained access to something Void Palace disciples paid exorbitant fees for free. With a thought, Lionel put the Rapax corpse away. He had to take it out to ensure that the zone recognized his victory. But, with cursed beasts still lingering around, he couldn't just leave it lying around. Lionel swept his senses around before shooting forward once again, streaking up the mountain at the greatest speed he could muster without destroying his stamina. Inwardly he was intrigued. Blinded by his previous greed, he had forgotten that it should have been impossible to take things out of a subdimensional zone until it reached the standard of the gold grade. Only gold grade subdimensional zones, and above, could produce treasures that one could take out and use for themselves in the real world. Though a Rapax wasn't exactly a treasure to most, its corpse was definitely one to Lionel, and it should have disappeared along with the zone. But it didn't. Interesting. Could it be that they used the shell of a gold grade zone to form their challenges? What an embarrassment of riches. They wouldn't even know that a Rapax corpse would be useful to me. Though I guess you could probably trade it in just like you could curse beast corpses. Lionel was 100% correct. The Void Palace had, indeed, used previously gold grade zones as a shell. But no one had ever seen through such a thing so easily. The journey forward wasn't met by any opposition. In fact, it felt almost too easy. Outside of the occasional beast that crossed his path, there was nothing else. Of course, these beasts were nothing compared to the Rapax, and Lionel almost felt too naive for having thought them to be strong. His horizon felt far wider now than they had been before. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. It'll be a bit of a challenge. Lionel thought to himself as he sliced apart another beast, leaping onto a branch and skipping toward the canopy of another tree. I'm not sure how the Void Palace will react to new people suddenly showing up within their borders. They're likely already aware that I have extra people with me just by virtue of the zone's reaction. But this was the only real worry on Lionel's mind now. It was one thing if he could just keep his people hidden within the segmented cube. With the size of the segmented cube, the amount of things he could accomplish was endless. He could train them, acclimate them to anarchic force, and he could even allow them to benefit from the Void Palace's resources. But now he had been exposed. There was simply no way for him to avoid the detection of a zone. He wondered if he could get away with bending the rules again. He was probably already public enemy number one with the interference of Orinik and Asena by now. Why not become a little more hated? Lionel chuckled to himself. Regardless, he would take things as they came. It was already too late to worry much about it all now. Slashing out again, Lionel's spear suddenly met some unexpected resistance. But he simply calmly retreated, stepped out of the way of a downward swinging claw, and attacked the exact same spot once more. This time, his spear went clean through. Before the beast could even collapse, he had already stepped by it and stored its corpse away. That was another problem. Lionel's spears were beginning to become a choking point for him. He would have been able to defeat the Rapax much easier if his spear could withstand his destruction artistic conception, but it couldn't. Lionel believed that there were two reasons for this, and he would only need to fix one to experience a large leap in strength. But he would need to ideally fix both if he wanted to reach his goals. The first was that his spears were too weak. Quasi-silver spears were at the pinnacle of the fifth dimension, but Lionel's Scarlet Star Force was relentless. Unless he could find another way to protect them, he would have to upgrade as soon as possible. The second was that his control over his conceptualization of destruction was far too weak, and ill-controlled as well. While it was true that Miguel had relied on true silver-grade weapons to withstand his Scarlet Star Force, how could normal silver-grade weapons compare to a domain spear of an heirloom like Lionel's? Fundamentally, Miguel's comprehension had been beyond Lionel's, and as such, he could get away with it. This chapter upload first at NovelBin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. In that case, I need to stop wasting time holding back my destruction conceptualization as though it was just a trump card. It shouldn't be a trump card, it should be a core part of my battle style. Treating it like a final gotcha moment would just impede my progress. Lionel felt enlightened. The moment he had unleashed his destruction, he had broken past a barrier he hadn't even been trying to cross. Why should he keep holding himself back like this? He was only harming himself. Blackstar, I'll have to hand Aina over to you. Yip. Yip. Little Blackstar was suddenly enveloped by a dense black fog, becoming an enormous wolf with twin tails. He gently rested Aina within them, and the master beast pair shot off together. A faint red glow hung around Lionel, a dangerous light exuding from him. Just this choice alone had made him a far fiercer opponent. One most would definitely not choose to cross of their own volition. Ironically, though, it wouldn't be long before the pair were forced to stop once again. Before Lionel, a vast lake covered in a dense layer of fog lay. He stood upon a rocky ledge without room to go left or right. He couldn't even find a path to go around at all. At that moment, though, his gaze narrowed. There were other rocky ledges around this enormous foggy lake, and some of them had people waiting on them as well. Right then, Lionel was suddenly enveloped by a light. It was this that made him realize why it was he could see these people from so far away. They too were enveloped by a light. The difference was, though, that while their lights were gold, his was a violet gold. All their attention was focused on Lionel in an instant. They all became aware that an amethyst token had appeared. Just to today TT. Chapter 1316. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 30 seconds p.m. Chapter 1316. Golden Sector. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1316. Golden Sector. Lionel's gaze narrowed. He had a feeling that this was where the true challenges would begin. Everything up until this point was nothing more than a weeding out of sorts, a filter. It seemed that things would only get interesting now. A faint sort of excitement bubbled up within Lionel's heart, a searing heat pulsing above his right hip. This sort of stage, it was the kind he really wanted to be on. He faintly hoped that these people would not disappoint him. Cornelius could see the shift in Lionel's demeanor, and right then, it felt like something that had been confusing him finally snapped into place. Observing Lionel felt like one of the most confusing things he ever had to do. Sometimes the young man was hot, sometimes cold. Sometimes he was murderous and sometimes he was forgiving. Sometimes he was arrogant, and at other times he was humble. Sometimes he met the day with a smile, and at other times he met it with coldness. As confusing as his personality was, his battle prowess was even more so. Cornelius couldn't even decide whether he was a talent or an average genius, something that was baffling considering the fact the young man had just single-handedly defeated a Rapax soldier. But that only emphasized just how hard it was to get a read on Lionel. Sometimes his true self slumbers, and sometimes it peeks an eye open, groggily observing the world around him as though to check if those before him were worthy. This chapter upload first at Novel.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novel.com to experience faster update speed. As for when Lionel would truly wake up, Cornelius had no way of knowing, or else maybe he wouldn't be so confused. The main issue, though, was that this was exactly like a certain man. He met the day with a bright smile on his face, joking around and chasing skirts without a care. You would never be able to tell that there was a slumbering monster within him, ready to pounce and destroy everything at the slightest poke. That slumbering beast, too, only partially awoke from time to time. But that day that it had fully awakened, that day when it rose up and unfurled its body, roaring into the skies, the Void Palace's very foundation had shaken. What the hell is this? The voice wasn't overly loud, but it was laced with an unconcealed fury. Its owner stared daggers toward Lionel, as though with just this alone, he could see the latter sliced and diced into minced meat. The young man looked like the picture of a roaring lion. He had a head of hair, sideburns and beard that all came together to form the image of a vibrant mane. His 2 eyes were a piercing bright brown and his teeth lengthened to the point 2 prominent canines jetted out whenever he opened his mouth. A sparkling white gold halberd stretched across his back, and his armor alternated in heavy white plates and dense brownish golden fur. Despite the fact he was in his early 20s, no one would have hesitated to believe that he was already well into his 30s, not because he looked so old, but because his facial hair simply didn't seem fit for someone so young. This chapter upload first at Novel.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novel.com to experience faster update speed. Those around this young man almost instantly smiled bitterly. They had known that these days of leisure wouldn't last for so long. Over the last few days, they could just sit back and do nothing. This overly prideful young master of theirs always insisted on doing everything himself, and he continuously plowed forward, blocking and destroying everything in their path. Usually, this sort of personality would have gotten them into a ridiculous amount of trouble. But with the current state of things and the setup of this particular trial, it was nothing but good. In the outside world, however, just these last few days alone their young master would have at least killed 3 prominent figures, ruined the future of at least one noble lady, and would have dove into at least one life or death situation that would have ended with at least 3 of them losing their lives, only to be replaced by a new wave of youthful retainers. Then they would be forced to spend the next coming days cleaning up the mess while their young master rested, only for them to do it all over again the next week. But this time, the list of those who hated their young master would have increased by that exact number. It could be said that this young man was even better at stirring up trouble than Lionel. His was Conan Leo, the leading youth of the Golden Sector's Leo family. Much like Conan's attendants had expected such behavior, they also knew why their young master was reacting like this as well. The Golden Sector was unlike most due to its special structure. In conjunction with its complex history, no single family had been able to dominate it. However, unlike the 3-pillar sector, the 3 families that locked heads in the Golden Sector were far higher on the totem pole. In fact, if that very same 1 to 10 scale used to understand the Libra family was used, then these 3 families would actually faintly surpass them, sitting at solids 8s and 9s. Due to this, despite his achievements, Conan hadn't been able to monopolize the amethyst token like a talent like him would have in practically any other year. Instead, he had been locked into a stalemate with the young heir of the Terrius family, Armand, and the young miss of the Pius family, Simona. Unluckily, all 3 families had birthed outstanding talents in this generation. As though that wasn't bad enough, Conan, Armand and Simona might have been the tip of the iceberg, but they had several cousins, brothers and sisters who could only be considered a step below. In fact, in a weaker generational pool, it would have been possible for 1 or 2 of them to have gained an amethyst token. And one of these individuals was Conan's elder brother who stoically stood to his side right this moment, Gunter Leo. And yet, now all of these geniuses were seeing a right they were snubbed from due to unfortunate luck, sitting in the palm of a nameless young man they had never seen or heard of before. No, they had heard of him just a few days ago. But What they had heard only fueled their rage all the more. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 13-17. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 28 seconds p.m. Chapter 13-17. A choice if audio player doesn't work. Press stop then play button again. Chapter 13-17. A choice. Lionel could feel the animosity. It was almost palpable. The hairs on his skin stood on end and his blood vessels dilated. The pumping of his heart grew slower and more forceful. A subtle crimson energy racing throughout his body. In the blink of an eye, his body had been covered in a thin veil of sweat. However, it wasn't the kind of sweat one would gain out of fatigue or fear. It was the kind of sweat that would cover a boxer on their way to the ring, having just completed a small round of cardio to warm their bodies up. It was the kind of sweat that would soak a runner in the middle of a run when they finally set their pace and hit their perfect stride. It was the kind of sweat that didn't allow the body to rise past a certain level of heat, settling in at the perfect degree for prime functioning. When Lionel's body entered such a state, he felt more alive than he ever had before. His nodes worked as one, circulating his blood throughout his body, and leaving him a state where he was absolutely prepared for everything. One could have easily mistaken him for a predator on the prowl, his expression seeming decidedly less human in those moments. Bang! At that moment, a geyser shot into the air. The temperature skyrocketed and vision from all angles was completely blurred. Lionel was forced to retract his internal sight at that moment. He felt like a scalding heat was ready to fry his mind if he remained any more stubborn. It was a shocking sort of feeling for someone like Lionel who hadn't felt true heat in years. Thanks to his fire elemental affinity, what was usually overly hot for others was a breezy spring day to Lionel. For his internal sight to be fried like this, it was definitely a unique experience. But considering his body was still just fine, it was clear that his mind had a weakness that the rest of him didn't share. Lionel slotted in this realization to the back of his mind, and kept it for future deductions. For now though, his mind focused entirely on what was before him, and he remained supremely focused, ready for anything. However, what happened next felt somewhat anticlimactic. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. The geyser fell, and the heavy mist it had come with faded. But there was hardly any other change, but a platform that had appeared 1 meter ahead of Lionel's cliff ledge. This platform of rock hung upon absolutely nothing, and it seemed that everyone had gotten one. Each group gained exactly one of these. Lionel didn't think very much about it at all. With a single stomp, he leaped onto the platform, little Blackstar following behind him just as quickly. Almost the instant he landed, though, he vanished, disappearing as though he had never been there. The minutes ticked by and soon, with a whoosh, Lionel and Blackstar appeared once more. Nothing seemed to have changed at all. Aina was still resting on Blackstar's tails. Little Blackstar was still floating within the forehead of his construct, and Lionel still stood, unmoved. However, if one looked very closely, it was possible to see that a subtle hint of blood drizzled down the pointer and middle finger of Lionel's right hand, dripping down to the ground in slow, steady droplets. And at the same time, the fire in his gaze had only grown more savage and unfettered. He stared intently ahead, waiting for the next. And he wasn't disappointed in the slightest. Bang! Another geyser appeared. Lionel seemed to have forgotten about all the eyes on him, intent to focus on what was before him, his mind thirsting for battle as the sheen of sweat that covered him began to emit just the slightest hints of a steamy fog. This time, 3 platforms appeared. One ahead, one to the left and another to the right. The ones to the left and right were about 2 meters away from Lionel's current platform, while the one ahead was just a single meter away once again. Lionel's gaze narrowed when he noticed this change. Despite the fact it was subtle and almost meaningless, it made his mind whir into action. In truth, in this state, he wanted to do nothing more than turn his brain off and fight to his heart's content. But to him, this was too obvious of a detail to miss out on. The rules of this game were still obscure, but the general gist was obvious enough to Lionel. Use the platforms, defeat their bosses, and reach a certain destination. This chapter upload first at novel.bin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit novel.next.com to experience faster update speed. If the main goal was to reach a destination, then a movement of 2 meters obviously seemed better. Or did it? To Lionel, the destination could be deduced through simple logic. Varying groups of geniuses surrounded the outline of this lake. That meant it would make little sense for the destination to be any opposing bank or cliff edge. By process of elimination, the destination was most likely the center of the lake itself, something that was easily over a kilometer away. At a pace of 1 meter per bout, it would obviously take 1,000 battles for Lionel to reach the center. However, to his left and right, there was a movement of 2 meters. The bad news, though, was that unlike the center platform, these ones deviated from the path toward the center. So although they allowed him to leap a larger distance, they still ultimately left him further away. That said, Lionel had to believe that there was a reason why these left and right platforms would exist. If the Void Palace wanted a simple race to the center, they could have done so. In fact, Lionel wasn't the only one who had jumped at the platform the moment it appeared, and he also now wasn't the only one to have already come out. Now they were all faced with the same dilemma. Would they take the straightforward path? Or would they risk it all for the unknown? Lionel's grin widened. With a stomp of his foot, he launched himself onto the right platform, his intent blazing as he and Blackstar vanished once more. When they reappeared, they found themselves in another foggy world filled with white borders. Ahead lay another Raypax soldier. "I'm sorry everyone, I woke up with a headache today and it threw my whole day off. More action tomorrow, smiley face." Chapter 1318. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 26 seconds p.m. Chapter 1318. Good. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1318. Good. Lionel shot forward, his divine armor appearing on his body. His palm flipped over, forming a claw with his fingers curled toward the sky. As though a wild beast, he sliced upward, the rupturing glass of space following his every movement. But what was even more dangerous were the tendrils of destruction that filled in the cracks, layering Lionel's strike with a violent abandon that shook the core. Bang! Lionel's claw and the Raypax axe kick met, but it was the latter that found itself sprawling backward. That's the first effect. Destruction cripples force not much unlike anarchic force, burning it to ashes. Lionel's steps shifted, his claw morphing as he pressed his fore and middle finger together into a short spear. He pierced forward as the Raypax stumbled back, its leg now thrown high into the sky. After 2 battles with the Raypax, Lionel had already learned of their weaknesses. The race as a whole had poor posture. At first, it looked like a coincidence, but after 3 encounters, it most definitely wasn't. For an entire race to share the same habit, there was clearly a reason for this. When the Raypax hunched over, their spines coiled. The plates that covered their torsos were as tight and compact as possible, making the more fragile joints almost impossible to target. At best, one would be able to attack non-lethal areas like the arms and legs. However, when forced to open up, the joints went from non-existent and snapped closed to open by a sliver. This chapter upload first at novel.bin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit novel.next.com to experience faster update speed. In truth, this couldn't be said to be a weakness at all. Even when standing to their full height, the gaps in the Raypax plate armor was at most counted in millimeters. In addition, the skin of the Raypax was especially tough, albeit not nearly as tough as their steely carapace. Still, it could be said that the defenses of their exposed flesh was only 2 or 3 ticks below Lionel's own when he activated his bronze runes. That alone was enough to make them impervious to lower-tier bronze weapons. Still, this slight and almost negligible flaw was more than enough for Lionel. PCHU. No, I'm wrong. That's too simple and doesn't give destruction enough credit. It's not burning things to ash, it's erasing it from existence. This is the reason why the Raypax, despite not emitting force and keeping it circulating within its body, can still have its strength weakened by me. Lionel had yet to meet a Rapax that used an external source of force. And yet his destruction characteristic still had the effect of greatly weakening its attack. On the surface, this didn't make much sense unless he was underestimating the effect of his Scarlet Star force from the very beginning. Lionel's spear force pierced through the more fragile skin of the Rapax, slicing through its body and incinerating its inner organs to ash. This isn't enough. The moment Lionel appeared outside once again, he had already leapt forward. This time, there was only a single platform to choose from, once again about 2 meters ahead of him. When he landed, he found himself in a new world once more, facing yet another Rapax. Lionel wasn't a fool. He had realized many things by now. The rules and regulations of this true selection seemed almost too loose. They didn't limit who could group with who. They didn't make any effort to separate allies and even threw them all in the same village without a care, and they made no attempt to regulate what might be seen as unfairness. But was this entirely true? This chapter upload first at novelbin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit novelnext.com to experience faster update speed. Lionel felt differently. In fact, he believed that the Void Palace had a perfect pulse on everything that was happening. All things considered, the appearance of the subdimensional zone seemed completely random, especially if there was a trial like this one waiting not long after. That was unless one considered the one thing a zone could do perfectly that anything else might slip up with. And that was counting the number of individuals in a party. Lionel's segmented cube could hide people from far too many methods of detection. And Lionel wasn't the only one with a treasure that could accomplish such a feat, especially with so many young geniuses with astonishing backgrounds around. So the Void Palace borrowed the power of the regulator to shore up potential loopholes. Using the zone, they saw through any hidden trump cards a youth might have. Then, after doing this, they threw these simulations at the group one after another. Lionel could feel that these weren't real Rapax he was facing. The only real Rapax was the one whose corpse now hung in his segmented cube. These were nothing more than practice dummies set with the assumption that Lionel's group had the support of 6 individuals total. But Lionel wouldn't have it any other way. There was no better method than squeezing out every ounce of potential he had. Lionel flickered and vanished, his body appearing atop the Rapax. With a strong punch downward, its head completely caved in. What once was an armor Lionel couldn't leave even the slightest scratch on, lost all of its structural integrity beneath a single vicious blow, crushing the skull of the Rapax and shattering its brain. When Lionel appeared above the foggy lake once more, his gaze flickered, the vague image of a hidden rune dancing within his irises. He felt that he was faintly approaching his first watershed. His innate node thrummed with life, his body feeling as though it was alive. Lionel had come to realize that so long as he didn't actively call upon Scarlet Star Force, and simply allowed his body to naturally regulate how much he could withstand, what could have been a lethal dose to anyone else became like a steroid pumping through his veins. This feeling is good. Lionel leapt forward, vanishing once more. The ire of his peers didn't make him waver in the slightest. In fact, he very much hoped that he would run into one of them very soon. He wanted to see what the geniuses of the human domain had to offer. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 1319. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 24 seconds p.m. Chapter 1319. Roundhouse. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1319. Roundhouse. Lionel's hair fluttered, his body surrounded by powerful artistic conceptions. His star conception looked almost no different from his previous summer conception. However, the difference in its power was akin to night and day. Lionel had already set the path for his heavenly body realm comprehension, after stepping foot into the core of the Milky Way Guild's disaster world. His summer construct was formed as the foundation of his star construct. His fall construct was the foundation of his moon construct. His winter construct became the foundation of his planet construct. And finally, his spring construct became the foundation of his meteor construct. The summer construct spoke for itself. Radiant core was a dense mass of radiant force, a high radioactive like fire elemental force. It had strong gravitational and magnetic properties, making it both good for defense and great for increasing Lionel's offensive output as well. Lionel often liked to use it as a core of his blade forces to form volatile drills. Lionel's fall construct was only used on occasion, but it was exceptionally powerful. It was dubbed a slow death by him. When he released its artistic conception, autumn leaves would fall from the skies in gorgeous colors ranging from bright orange to somber reds and browns. It had the effect of sucking away life force, matching with Lionel's winter construction, withering snowfall. Withering snowfall was a lot like a slow death, but rather than targeting the life force of people, it targeted their attacks. When in effect, it felt like the force in the area had dried up as ash fell from the skies like snowfall. If an autumn leaf of a slow death touched you, you would feel sluggish and slow. If an ash fall of withering snowfall touched your technique, its strength would plummet. Lionel didn't change the names of a slow death and withering snowfall, and now, they worked together better than they ever had before. Lionel's planet construct became a ball of gorgeous white. Around it, moons of red, orange and brown rotated, their very presence making one feel as though they had aged a decade. The cycles of the moon made one feel as though time was passing at varying rates, distorting one's image of reality as though their mind had been cast into an odd illusion. At the same time, the pull of the planet could cause force to bend beneath its will, pushing and pulling, multiplying or eradicating. Together, they were a perfect team, tugging on both reality and imaginary. Having evolved, a slow death now placed far more emphasis on slow, a lulling of the mind, a false sense of security, a pulling of wool over the eyes. Likewise, withering snowfall placed far more emphasis on withering now. Finally, there was golden drops, the conception of spring and now Lionel's meteor construct. It was the most simple and straightforward. As spring, it released small droplets of golden rain, each as heavy as an anvil. And now, it released enormous rocks of golden fire, each as heavy as a small mountain. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed subconsciously. Lionel's conceptions of destruction seeped into his heavenly body realm. It was impossible to avoid. His mind was wrapped into all things Scarlet Star Force. He hardly realized just how many stages he was blazing through without a care. He just wanted more. He couldn't seem to be satisfied, and he didn't seem to understand fatigue. He kept pushing and pushing relentlessly. He didn't even realize that his moon conception was becoming the most warped, evolving to something that stepped beyond what should have been possible for the heavenly body realm. It took Lionel 4 battles to grasp his meteor construct, 8 more to grasp his planet construct, and easily more than a dozen to grasp his moon construct. By the time he fused them all together, reaching the pinnacle and touching upon a state even among other true state comprehenders, he had already fought over 40 battles. Lionel improved by leaps and bounds with each. Even though the ray packs he faced were supposed to be getting stronger, he seemed to improve even faster than they did. With every strike, his prowess increased by small percentage points. He became more acclimated to his own body. He learned more about his destruction conceptions, and he began to truly take advantage of his sharpened minds and the awakening of his soul. For the first time, Lionel was given challenge after challenge worthy of his talent level. Rather than being stuck in an organization filled with those who couldn't hope to match up to him, he was finally in a world where he couldn't just casually take step after step, and the result? Lionel's potential was dragged up piece after piece, bit after bit. It started like a trickle, but it eventually became an overwhelming tide, a tsunami that washed all those away. Even still at Tier 5, he faced a Tier 8 Raypax dauntlessly. He grabbed onto its throat, ripping its neck from its shoulder, and feeling its final squeals vibrate his palms. When Lionel appeared again, there was no longer anywhere else to go. Bang! This time it wasn't a geyser. A platform crashed against his, fusing into a makeshift arena with lethal edges and a diameter of just over 20 meters. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed up ahead. A group of geniuses shrouded in veils of gold met Lionel. There were just 3 of them, but each one carried their own air of haughtiness and pride. When they saw the violet gold sheen around Lionel, their gazes narrowed. That's him. The pathetic bastard who had his mommy get his token for high. Lionel's mind was still in battle mode. He hadn't even considered the idea that these people would want to exchange words. And, even if they did, what did it have to do with him? His body seemed soaked in a bloody aura, a dense crimson fog fusing with his violet king's might. Bang! His fist crushed the ribcage of the man who had spoken. The sound of shattering bone and an upheaval of blood and vomit resounded as he was sent flying backward. His 2 teammates snapped out of their shock. They both reacted at the same time, rushing backward to save their group member before he fell off the edge and toward his death. But Lionel had followed closely behind. In a blink, his foot had appeared by the side of a young maiden's face in a perfect roundhouse kick. After fighting so many Raypaks, his mind had been infused with all sorts of perfect kicking forms, and his body had adapted just as easily. Bang! His foot hooked across and downward, slamming her cheeks into the rugged stone platform, and deforming her lovely features from 2 sides at once. If he had used any more strength, her entire head would have burst like a watermelon. The 3rd and final teammate just barely managed to catch the first Lionel had sent flying before he was sent over into the lake below. However, when he looked back, all he could do was look on in shock. How was the gap so large? A steamy breath left Lionel's lips, the veins beneath his skin pulsing with a subtle red-gold color. Chapter 1320. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 23 seconds p.m. Chapter 1320. Is that all? If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1320. Is that all? The 3rd teammate's gaze turned steely. Regardless of the situation, he was still a genius in his own right, and the weight of a golden token wielder this year was far heavier than it had been in previous years. As far as he was concerned, they had underestimated Lionel, but they wouldn't continue to do so. Setting his teammate down, he immediately flipped his palms to reveal a twin pair of short sabers. With a step, his figure flickered and vanished, appearing before Lionel with a wind. It only took a glance for Lionel to pick out several things. A strong wind and dark elemental affinity, level 2 saber force, tier 9 strength, and what seemed to be either a lineage factor or ability index capable of making his presence fade. That matched with a top-level 5th-dimensional movement technique. And it felt like he had truly disappeared. Just this alone made the difference between these enemies and the ones Lionel had previously faced all too obvious. Just a random young man actually had so much talent. Lionel would often not run into an individual with even one of these talents, let alone all of them. The young man was right to be confident in himself. His blades flickered through the fog, jetting toward Lionel's throat like twin pincers, ready to sever his head from his shoulders. Bang! The young man suddenly found himself in a daze, his brain rattling in his skull, and his jaw feeling like it might shatter as a strong upward pressure shot into it from below. It took him several moments for him to realize that Lionel's heel was blasting his head upward, his sabers just inches from the latter's neck, and yet feeling like a world away. The young man couldn't wrap his head around how Lionel had grasped such impeccable timing. No, how had Lionel even been so fast? How had he been so confident? Lionel's legs formed a perfect split in the air, his heel driving up through the young man's jaw with such fierceness that the latter's feet lifted off the ground, sending him spiraling into the foggy skies like a rocket. The young man tried to reach out with the last reserves of his strength to close the final distance. But his efforts only made Lionel's gaze flicker. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. Crack. The final bits of structural integrity the young man's jawline had left crumbled. A muffled cry tried to leave his lips but ended up dwarfed by a mouthful of shattered teeth and jawbone shards. Shoo! He spiraled into the air as Lionel slowly lowered his leg, the dense crimson around him and the subtle red gold of his veins becoming more prominent. With a dull thump, the young man fell back down to the ground, his body having shut down completely. And maybe for him this was for the best. The pain of having half your face shattered was most definitely not something anyone would want to be conscious for. Lionel released a breath, his chest moving at an even rhythm. He didn't even seem to have exerted himself, his breathing remaining unhurried and unbothered. Is this all? How boring. Lionel was disappointed. Maybe it was his mistake for still unleash everything. He hadn't even held back his ability index. In truth, as fast as Lionel was progressing, he still needed to find time to comprehend his ability index as well. Wise Star Order had told him that this was the only way to stop the restrictive ability Anarchic Force had on his Dream Force. But at the same time, using his ability index made battles too easy. Lionel had progressed so fast that what had started as a challenge had become the same mundane nonsense he was used to. Was this really the pinnacle of the human domain? There had to be more, there had to be something waiting. The glowing cloaks of the 3 down-and-out geniuses rumbled before separating from their bodies. Soon, they became floating orbs in the air. Oh, you can take them? Okay. This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net if you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. Lionel reached out, causing the 3 orbs to come toward him. Then his flicked wrist toward Aina and let her absorb all 3. An audible crack resounded as the golden tokens of the 3 youths shattered. However, Aina's color still seemed to be gold without the slightest change. I see, so this is a choice. Those that go straight ahead have the best chance at dodging a forceful confrontation between geniuses. However, those that go right or left will eventually find themselves in a fight. You can either go straight and choose to keep the token you have or deviate and seek out something better. I already have an amethyst token, so I don't particularly need this. However, if I can raise Aina to an amethyst as well, it'll be a great advantage for the future. Plus, this is still a good opportunity to hone my combat prowess. From Lionel's understanding, only those who wielded golden tokens could immediately become quadrant-ranked disciples upon entering the Void Palace. Those without golden tokens would have to slowly prove themselves to rise above the nominal disciple rank. However, what no one had explained just yet was what the amethyst token could do. If Lionel was correct, the amethyst token just might represent a straight path toward the galaxy rank. Or at the very least, you would get the chance to try. With this attempt, not only would a whole host of new resources be opened up, but it would also save Lionel many years as well. If he could bring Aina along with him and they could work together, the benefits would be exponentially greater. That way the 2 of them could forge a path for everyone else to follow behind. Having come to this conclusion, Lionel's gaze sharpened. Bang! A geyser erupted once again. But what was interesting was the fact that the path ahead didn't gain an explosion. In fact, the path the 3 youths had come from was still open. Interesting. The easy path, or? Lionel's feet were already moving as he jumped toward the mist left behind by the geyser. Chapter 1321. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 22 seconds p.m. Chapter 1321. Right hand if audio player doesn't work. Press stop then play button again. Chapter 1321. Right hand Cornelius watched Lionel, his expression warping from time to time. 30%. He's gotten 30% stronger in a few hours. 40. 50. 80. Cornelius felt as though his head was spinning. A part of him wanted to believe that this wasn't improvement speed, but rather just Lionel showing more of the strength he already had. But he felt like he knew better than to try and conclude such a thing. What was the most baffling was that he felt a change in Lionel after that fight. Those 3. That young man is from the Sith family, the leading head of Shield Cross Star's stealth unit. He isn't the best among their current generation, but he's still within the top 5. He's even awakened the Sith lineage factor to such a level already. But Cornelius could feel it. Lionel got bored, and the instant he did, the rapid improvement that he was experiencing plummeted. It was as though Lionel could use his own mood to influence how fast his own progress could be. Cornelius had never heard of something like this before. Does he not have goals and aspirations? Does he not have something to strive for outside of what's right in front of him? If Lionel could hear Cornelius' thoughts, he would be baffled. Reason being, he definitely had a goal to strive after. He wouldn't be able to understand how or why Cornelius would come to such a conclusion. However, for any neutral outside observer, Cornelius' conclusion wasn't only sound, it was reasonable and felt like the truth. A person who had bought into their purpose, who truly strove after it with all they had, wouldn't be like Lionel. Why would something like boredom slow him down? Monotony was something anyone who wanted to succeed would have to learn to accept. Did that mean that Lionel didn't believe in his goal? Not necessarily. This chapter upload first at novel.bin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit novelnext.com to experience faster update speed. If Cornelius knew of what Lionel wanted to accomplish, rather than feeling that it was all ridiculous, he might look toward Lionel more like he was looking at a monster rather than just a child he was looking after. There were only two real explanations for this. It was either Lionel didn't take his goal to conquer the dimensional verse as seriously as he claimed to, or Lionel was so confident in his inevitable success that he felt no pressure whatsoever. Lionel knew that he was likely being observed, but he had already thrown such thoughts to the back of his mind, already focusing on his new goal. Now that he knew platforms didn't disappear, and that paths formed by others could be used, he realized that this was a great opportunity. The more time passed, the more complicated the structure would become, and the more chances there would be. There was a good chance that the more empty paths there were, the more geniuses would begin to travel along them. If Lionel ignored the easy paths to take, then others could take them. Eventually, the opponents Lionel needed would end up coming to him rather than him having to go and find them. Lionel could tell that this trial was built to allow this to happen. The more platforms were cleared, the more interconnectivity there would be, and the more likely it would be for two groups to run into each other. From the beginning, this was the design. Lionel was just making a decision that would allow this to happen faster. Rather than following paths that had already been cleared, he would forge new ones. As Lionel barreled forth, the day waned and Aina finally showed signs of waking up. When she finally did so, she realized that she lay on something as soft as clouds. It took her a moment before she registered the fact that it was a special ability of Blackstar's. She sat up slightly, Blackstar's twin tails allowing her all the room she needed to maneuver. Feeling the change, little Blackstar, who hovered in the forehead of his foggy construct, looked back. This chapter upload first at novel.bin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit novelnext.com to experience faster update speed. Yip. Yip. He excitedly greeted Aina, causing her to reveal a beautiful smile. Aina's gaze shifted toward Lionel's back. She knew that he was probably aware that she was awake already, but he was too focused on ripping apart the raypacks before him to pay attention to any of that. The defined muscles of his back, shoulders and lats rippled with veins and striations as he destroyed yet another foe. Aina took a deep breath, looking down at her hands. She felt much better. In fact, she felt better than she had in a long time. The anarchic force wasn't that much of an issue to her. After decades of dealing with a curse day in and day out, this felt like a light punishment. She had just needed to replenish her mind after draining it so completely. Even with how powerful her own mind was, Yuri was simply on a different level. Aina stretched, her curves displaying an enticing sight as she pulled her torso taut. Her figure was enticing to an extreme, her skin giving off a healthy color. She ran her hands through her hair, a light smile tugging at her pink lips. With a light push, she flipped through the air, landing like a feather on her feet. In a blink, she had appeared by Lionel's side, a delicate fragrance of apple and cinnamon following her every movement. Lionel's fist shot through the throat of the last raypax, exhaling a light breath. He looked to the side as they vanished, appearing above the lake once more. His gaze met Aina's and he smiled lightly, his palm flipping over to hand her a familiar battle axe. Aina accepted it gracefully, resting the enormous 2-meter-long polearm on her shoulder, as though it weighed nothing at all. Without a word exchanged, the two leapt to the next platform, little Blackstar following closely behind. Aina had come at the perfect time. The number of raypacks they needed to face increased from just 1 to 2, and it would very likely increase from now on. Lionel let Aina take more of the lead. allowing her to get accustomed to fighting this new enemy. Subconsciously, Lionel knew that his biggest reliance in the journey ahead would be this woman by his side now. She was the only one among his current group with talent comparable to his, and he knew that this would be what it took to reach his goals. How could his right-hand woman not be able to cut down Raypax just as easily as he could? The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 1322. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 20 seconds p.m. Chapter 1322. Perfect timing if audio player doesn't work. Press stop then play button again. Chapter 1322. Perfect timing. Aina adjusted quickly. Her battle sense had always been beyond Lionel's. What Lionel had to deduce and calculate, she did as naturally as breathing, her instincts and reflexes existing on a plane all to her own. Facing the oppressive leg kicks of the Raypax, her movements were as calming as a spring's wind, and as lithe as a ball of cotton. Lionel observed without a word, his mind entering a different sort of state. Now that he was out of his raging battle mode, he began to think about things in a new light. It was quite interesting. Of all the battle styles the Raypax could have with its powerful body, their race seemed to have chosen to become a group of kicking experts. One would never expect such a thing from their poor overall posture. But at the same time, Lionel had to admit that it suited them quite well. The claws on their feet had a lethality that spoke for themselves. Their tails gave them an extra foundation to balance upon, giving them freedom of movement two-legged humans couldn't hope to match. They had an extra joint in their legs giving them added leverage for power. And as though all of these things weren't enough, their legs themselves were exceptionally long, taking up as much as 3/4 of their body. When things were broken down this way, it felt like it would be more of a shame than anything else if the Raypax chose any other martial art form. This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novelnext.com to experience faster update speed still. What fascinated Lionel wasn't the choice, but rather everything that facilitated its success. The Raypax could display strength far beyond their tier all, because of this choice of theirs. Lionel could imagine that their people had probably evolved a whole culture around their legs. Every technique, every lineage factor, and maybe even their ability indexes to a certain extent, were all streamlined to maximize this ability. Ability indexes were meant to be random, and had nothing to do with genes and DNA. However, they had to come from somewhere. If Lionel was correct, then much like everything else, ability indexes were gifted and birthed from force. And just like Wise Star Order had said, the human domain was the only domain where the force was so widely variable and random. In that case, if the Raypax force distribution was so much more compact and streamlined, then wouldn't that also mean that the kind of ability indexes that could be bestowed upon their people also existed within a narrow margin? When things were looked at from this perspective, it all fell into place. Lionel hadn't noticed any obvious usage of an ability by the Raypax in the battles he had fought. But then again, he had only fought one real Raypax, while these Aina was facing now were nothing more than simulations. However, he had a feeling that even if they were real, the talents of the Raypax would all be so united in one pursuit that it wouldn't be easy even for him to tease apart their intricacies. So this is why the gap exists between humans and other races. We're so good at so many things that we've branched our evolutionary paths into more roads than could possibly be accounted for. If things are looked at in this way, even though my worldviews make the likes of the Brazinger family to be disgusting, maybe they have their reasons as well. Having such a thought made Lionel feel slimy, but it was the objective truth. The obsession of the Brazinger family over the purity of their bloodlines, even to the point of cursing a little girl to a lifetime of pain and suffering all as a warning, could be said to make sense if things were looked at through this light. When Lionel thought about it, everything about Aina's talents were perfect. Her ability index, her lineage factor, her style, her force affinities. They all combined into a single monstrous monolith. Now that he thought about it, the one other Brazinger family member that he had had in-depth contact with was also like this. Simeon's gene manipulation ability index was a lot like Aina's ability if you thought about it. If anything, Simeon's gene manipulation ability was just a more involved and controlled version of Anna's ability, when extrapolated to an extreme. This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net something that would make perfect sense since Anna was a half-blood while Simeon was, presumably, full-blooded. When Lionel reached this point in his thoughts, he felt his heart skip a beat. These were all things he had already known for a very long time, but when they were put together and described like this, it all made almost too much sense. But at the same time, it was a reminder of his weakness. Lionel's talents worked together well enough, but it couldn't be said that they synergized and exponentially improved one another. However, if he truly wanted to reach the pinnacle of his strength, he would have to find a way. Lionel's gaze became serious. When I return to Earth, I won't let Simeon go again. His gene manipulation ability isn't even documented in any ability index I've ever read. In fact, I haven't ever seen Anna's ability documented either. But it also happens to be the perfect last piece to what the tentacle womb is missing, Lionel's mind word. He had created his dream path ability to help his brothers maximize their training regimens, taking inspiration from Anna's ability. It seemed that he would need to adjust it. Not only would he need to focus on maximizing their training, but he would also need to fuse all their talents toward a single path and battle style. Only like this would they become the absolute strongest versions of themselves. But first, I need to figure out how to do this for myself. I've already decided that my foundation will be my Scarlet Star Force and my comprehension of it is progressing smoothly. I need more data to complete the dream simulations for my future path, though. Lionel suddenly looked up as they vanished from the foggy world. Perfect timing. Up ahead, a group led by a young woman with a poisonous sort of air appeared to their left. Chapter 1323. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 18 seconds p.m. Chapter 1323. Good thing. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1323. Good thing. Lionel knew that he was getting ahead of himself. He couldn't complete this new streamlined battle style with the limited knowledge he had now. Only after seeing all the resources the Void Palace had on hand could he make an informed decision. But in the meanwhile, gathering data and ensuring Aina gained an amethyst token was his top priority. When the group across from them realized that they were facing Lionel, their gazes narrowed. But it wasn't just this, they could tell that Aina's cloak of gold was also a brighter and more vibrant sheen than usual as well. It was clear that this group had defeated others before reaching this point. There was no doubt that information about Lionel had already been spread. In fact, it could be said that it was because of Lionel that the battle to the center of the lake had become as violent as it had. The idea of fighting through many golden token wielders, a large segment of whom would have been amethyst token wielders any other year, was like asking for death. Most would have chosen to cut their losses and focus on reaching the main objective rather than chasing after side quests. However, Lionel had become a juicy piece of meat dangling over all of their noses. Rather than defeating a whole host of golden token wielders, all you would have to do is defeat a single fake amethyst token holder, and you would be promoted in a single bound. That sort of enticement and luck of the draw lottery was on a completely different level, and as a result, there were many more participants. All of this said, there were many groups who would have chosen to participate regardless, groups that had full and unbridled confidence in themselves. And this group, from a very familiar golden sector, was one of them. The young mistress of the pious family, Simona, almost seemed to glide as she walked, her dainty feet only barely peeking out beneath her long, dark purple gown from time to time. It truly seemed as though she was walking on air rather than solid ground. Her gait too smooth for words. Her hips swayed like a hypnotic pendulum. Her skin so pale that one might feel as though you just might be able to see right through it. However, she contrasted her near-transparent skin with bold dark purple lipstick and long, curved nails, decorated with gems and a base coat of the very same color. This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novelnext.com to experience faster update speed. Her hair was once again a dark shade of purple. The only slightly lighter sheen to be found were in her pair of irises, steady with an undying cold light. Despite the darkness she exuded, she was truly a beauty beyond words. A gorgeous woman with a delicate nose and gently sloping chin that lost out to Aina in no way. Her slender waist swayed just once more before she came to a stop, her subordinates following suit without a word as well. At that moment, a slender little pinkish-purple fox with the stature of a puppy peeked out from Simona's leg, its large black eyes blinking curiously as it observed little Blackstar. Lionel took all of this in without a word. The pressure he felt from this woman was no joke. Compared to the three he had defeated previously, she was on a completely different level. The dangerous light in her cold eyes spoke for itself, even while not saying a thing. Lionel had known that he might run into such a character taking the approach he had. But he had left it up to fate. It seemed that his luck wasn't very good. And yet, some of that bubbling excitement seemed to want to resurface. Unfortunately, as soon as that excitement came back, he felt a heated gaze boring 2 holes into his cheek. Eventually he sighed. Fine, fine, fine. She's yours. I'll handle the rest of them. Lionel had almost forgotten that Aina was even more of a battle maniac than maybe even he was. Toward his words, she smiled sweetly, her visage seeming to disperse the fog like a ray of sun. This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net, you have to take care of your image, Aina said lightly. What would it look like if a king was always fighting women? Lionel's lip twitched. Fighting women? What was wrong with that? There was probably a young woman, right about now, whose face was still half buried in dirt and stone, who was lamenting the fact Aina didn't wake up earlier. Aina giggled seeing Lionel's reaction. She knew well that he never cared about such things. On Earth he gave women their due as the fairer sex. However, after the metamorphosis, there was nothing fairer about women. With how Lionel broke everything down logically, he saw no reason to not treat women as his equals any longer. But this was exactly why she was here. There were some things that couldn't always be dictated by logic. Aina had already decided to do something about Lionel's choice of wardrobe when next she got the chance. He was too handsome to be wasting it all on sweatpants. Aina took a step forward, her smiling expression vanishing. Her battle axe rested on her shoulder, her long, jet-black hair dancing about in the wind. She looked particularly wild, the short beast-skin skirt and choker she wore playing on the fantasies of all who saw her. But after seeing how she interacted with Lionel, they were under no illusions about where her allegiances lay. Simona's cold gaze didn't waver. Instead, she only shifted it from Aina to Lionel. I don't fight the weak. Just hand over your tokens and scram. I have no interest in wasting time on unworthy scum. Her voice came out the same biting cold her image shared, her indifference washing over Aina. However, Lionel only grinned. Good thing she's not weak. Unfortunately for you, she's especially not weak when she's angry. Good luck. Aina's entire demeanor shifted, a dense fog of red erupting around her as her axe force pierced into the skies. Important announcement below. Smiley face. Chapter 1324. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 16 seconds p.m. Chapter 1324. Useless if audio player doesn't work. Press stop then play button again. Chapter 1324. Useless. Simona's pupils constricted. The instant Aina moved, it was as though the weight of an expert bore down from all sides. Her powerful thighs grew a size, her toned torso flexed, her slender arms pulsed with a power their slight frame had no business having. Every movement was efficient to an extreme and refined to the final detail. She was a work of art. Simona's expression calmed, her arms leaving their relaxed position and her hands raising. The long, painted nails that graced them curled like claws, shimmering with delicately designed gems. Her arm swept at the air even as Aina's axe swung downward. Bang! Claw and blade met. On one side, a dark violet gown danced wildly in the wind, and on the other, a long cascading river of jet-black hair flowed as though a single cohesive whole. Sparks flew between them, neither woman taking even a single step backward. Simona's arm trembled, her gaze narrowing further. In that instant, what looked like a stalemate collapsed. Bang! The ground beneath her feet shattered. her dress threatening to fly from her body out from below as though a strong air current had assaulted her ankles. This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit novelnext.com to experience faster update speed. Aina's strength with had been equal to Simona's suddenly erupted past her, forcing Simona to quickly retreat lest she be forced into the ground. As Simona fell backward, her delicate and seemingly dainty feet left deep craters in the ground. The little puppy that had been dancing around her ankles quickly dodging out of the way to avoid being crushed into minced meat. Simona's gaze flickered as Lionel's lip twitched. Well, he had given Simona a warning. It wasn't his fault that she hadn't listened. But then again, by the time he had given said warning, it was probably already too late for his advice to be heeded. There was no doubt in Lionel's mind that Aina had done it on purpose. Her control over her body was so finely tuned that she had put out only just enough strength to negate Simona's own counter in that instant. Then, when Simona was feeling confident that their strengths were about equal after a single probe, Aina erupted with more strength in a position that wasn't conducive to gathering momentum in the first place. The difference was clear. Simona had come into the exchange with intent to probe. Aina had entered the exchange with intent to humiliate. And the only way you could get away with such a thing is if you had the confidence and the arrogance to do so. Simona's gaze turned a shade colder, her final stomp stopping what was left her momentum just before reaching the edge of the platform. Simona wasn't very put off by this result. Physical strength was clearly Aina's strong suit, but it wasn't even something Simona would list in her top 3 best qualities. However, it was clear that Aina was aware of this as well, or else she wouldn't have taken such an approach. Aina could have forced her back immediately, but she hadn't chosen to do this. Instead, she had thrown down an obvious gauntlet. She didn't just plan to win this battle. She planned to cruise to its ends. She didn't just plan on winning, she planned on doing so handily. The cold light in Simona's gaze grew, a fog of dark violet force beginning to spread around her. The expressions of her subordinates changed, their hearts skipping a beat. They could tell that their young miss was enraged. Despite the fact her expression didn't seem to have changed in the slightest, the bloodthirst in her air now was heavier than the air itself. I would put the poison away, if I were you, Aina said lightly. Unless you're seeking to be humiliated again, that is. Simona didn't say a single word. Her right palm flipped over to reveal a snaking black with dense scale-like patterns that made it seem as though it had been carved out of the hide of a dragon. Her left palm flipped over to reveal a slender silver blade that seemed a bit too long to be considered a knife or dagger, but still a hint too short to be considered a sword or short sword. This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Net. This odd dual-wielding style was a specialty of the Pious family. A tail-like whip and a stinger-like sword. Together they formed a lethal combination of long and short range. The moment they appeared, 2 strong level 2 blade-like forces manifested. With a single step, Simona's gown tore a gash from its hem to her hip, revealing a gorgeous sight of supple calf and thigh. A garter pressed against her pale flesh, lined with slender silver needles that emitted an air of lethality. As Simona raised her leg to take a second step, both women vanished. A whip lashed out through the air, only to be deflected by a punch. A short sword split the wind in 2, only to have its blade force shattered by an axe. A flurry of exchanges erupted, the glow in Aina's golden irises becoming more prominent, and the coldness in Simona's own becoming deeper. The more blows they exchanged, the denser the dark violet fog seemed to become. The rolling waves plucked on the strings of the wind, gliding along with them and resonating as one. The moment this dark violet fog entered Lionel's range, he could feel his destruction characteristic eating at it alive. But he could also sense the dark violet fog trying to fight back to no avail. Bang! 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 I've told you. It's useless. Aina's figure flickered. Her ample chest grew a size and her cherry lips parted. Under the astonished gazes of all those watching their battle, she took in a strong breath, suddenly causing all the force in the surroundings to be pulled into her body. Lionel's brows shot up, but his shock was nothing compared to Simona's. The latter quickly blocked her chest but found herself stumbling backward hard, her small feet once again leaving dense trenches in the ground. Simona's gaze flickered. her palm flipping over to put her sword away just in time for her to reach for her thighs and throw out 3 needles at once. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 1325. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 15 seconds p.m. Chapter 1325. Disparity. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1325. Disparity. The needles whistled through the air with a strength that could match the rapax. The strong currents of wind it should have produced were split in two beneath their fine construction. Beneath the low light, they almost seemed to fuse into the fog, their bodies carrying with them a hint of devastating pressure. Even without this odd poisonous force, these needles were lethal. But, with them, it was enough to make far greater men feel inferior. Aina took a strong step forward, her hair fluttering. She released a hand from her battle axe and her palm swiped through the air with an elegant flair. Her every action was filled with confidence. In that moment, it felt like even though Simona and Aina could be considered comparable in beauty, when it came to innate disposition, the latter was in a class all to her own. As though the needles were nothing special at all, Aina caught the first between her fore and middle finger, the second between her middle and ring finger, and the last between her ring and pinky finger. Her arms swept through the air in a clear arc, not pausing for even a moment. The only sign of her action was a dull slapping sound as each one was trapped between her slender digits. Without missing a beat, Aina continued to move forward, her momentum not having stalled even a single measure. She didn't even seem to notice the dense purple force around her fingers at all, as though it could do nothing more than tickle her. Simona's eyes widened. She hadn't planned for her needles to harm or injure Aina, but she had banked on them stalling her opponent for just a moment. Catching them out of the air like that was completely beyond her expectations. It required a level of skill, speed and coordination that she could hardly wrap her head around, especially when the force she had coated it in was taken into consideration. Just a single mistake would have ended in Aina being skewered. Unfortunately for her, Simona hardly got the change to finish this thought before Aina's hand whipped forward once more. This time, the needles were sent flying again, but they felt almost twice as fast. Just a flick of Aina's wrist carried more strength than most could even begin to fathom behind it. Simona, who was still off balance, quickly brandished her short, silver sword, realizing that there was no other choice to make. Ding, ding, ding. This chapter upload first at novelbin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit novelnext.com to experience faster update speed. Simona's wrist went numb, her shoulder quaking as she was forced several steps back once again. But by then, even as she teetered on the edge of the platform, Aina had already appeared before her, her battle axe swinging downward once again. Aina's battle style was ruthless and to the point. She wasted no movements and seemed to make moves on instinct that cornered her enemy step by step. From the psychological assault that started the battle to the oppressive physical might that seemed to be about to end it, she had been absolutely perfect and without blemish. It almost made Simona look as though she was truly not worth much of anything despite the fact she was a true genius. Young Miss. The other younger generation members of the pious family couldn't remain standing no more. They had felt Simona's rage and knew better than to interfere. But now that things reached this point, even if their young miss became enraged, they couldn't just allow her to die. No one knew what was hidden within the foggy lake below, but considering the circumstances, it didn't take a genius to understand that it wasn't good. However, wasn't Lionel still here? Lionel had been observing everything intently from the very beginning. Despite being impressed with the battle, he wouldn't lag behind in intervening when the matter became like this. His figure flickered, his body appearing amidst the encirclement of pious family members. There were exactly 4 of them, each carrying a demeanor similar to Simona's. It was as though this entire family was suffused with an air of hardly disguised coldness. Their gazes only became colder when they saw Lionel. However, the latter only smiled, facing their attacks with a calmness. They're strong, Lionel thought to himself. This chapter upload first at novelbin.net. Lionel pressed 2 palms outward, slapping the forearm of a fist aimed for his head. Taking advantage of the shift in momentum, he threw a solid punch at their lats. He could feel a satisfying deformation of flesh and bone when his fist connected. But it only lasted a moment before this individual was blown away. At that same moment, Aina's blade descended upon Simona. Bang! Simona found herself thrust into the ground, the back of her head and even her back itself crushed into the stone beneath them. The only thing between herself and being sliced into was her blocking short sword, her entire body being pressed into the ground. A deep humiliation flickered within Simona's gaze. She could feel that the gap between her and Aina shouldn't feel this large. And yet here they were. The sound of muffled groans resounded as Simona's people were further blasted away, their bodies unable to keep up with Lionel's strikes and counters. It felt as though he was twice as fast, twice as strong and twice as capable as any one of them. Your golden token, Aina said lightly. Simona's blade trembled against Aina's axe while the latter's blade might as well have been as steady as a mountain. The disparity in raw strength couldn't have been more obvious. If Aina wanted to press down and kill her, she could do so only by adding a little bit more strength, just as she had done before. Simona's cold gaze flickered. But, without a word, she brought out her token. Under a mysterious law, it cracked, its color flowing into Aina. Lionel smiled, standing over the 4 defeated subordinates. This had gone even smoother than expected, but Lionel maybe should have known that things couldn't possibly stay so easy for him. Chapter 1326. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 14 seconds p.m. Chapter 1326. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1326. It could be said that the Pious family was simply unlucky to have run into Lionel and Aina of all people. If there were any two that could be considered perfect counters to their strongest points, it was most definitely this pair. The Pious family used a special force known as Pious Force, which was known for its poisonous and corrosive attributes. Any member of this family would have spent most of their time learning how to master and control this force due to the danger that it presented not to just to everyone around them, but namely even they themselves. As a result of this, the younger the Pious family member was, the more likely it was that the main tenet of their battle prowess would be their usage of Pious Force. Under normal circumstances, this was still enough for them to display strength beyond the imaginations of most. Pious Force was capable of many things. It could corrode force. Its thickness could push force it couldn't corrode away, forming a domain where the only force that could exist in a region was itself. It could infect a target, weakening their senses and slowing their reflexes. The list felt endless, and even this much was just the tip of the iceberg. If a wielder of this force wanted, they could even attack one's internal sight, corroding the mind and soul after a certain point. With the support of such a powerful force, the strength of its wielder would be undeniable. However, without it, Simona had lost as much as 90% of her true combat prowess. Unfortunately for her, Lionel's passive destruction cloak, a name he had decided to give his current state, destroyed practically everything in its path. Scarlet Star Force was an innately higher form of force than Pious Force and as a result, had a single problem suppressing it. On the other end, Aina was immune to poisons thanks to her ability. Her self-healing was on a level far beyond the healing factor given to Lionel by his Snowy Star Owl lineage factor. In her current state, even if Aina wanted to regrow an arm, she could do so. This was how far her ability index had progressed. Aina retracted her axe even as another geyser rose into the air. For more streams of gold entered her body, and the resplendent light that coated her rose to an all-new level. It seemed like it was right on the verge of evolving to a new tier. Maybe only 1 or 2 more golden tokens would be necessary for Aina to earn an amethyst token, then. Lionel smiled. Alright, let's go. He leapt toward a new platform, Aina following close behind. A dull silence was left in their wake. This chapter upload first at NovelBin. Net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit NovelNext.com to experience faster update speed. Simona didn't move for a long while. She knew why it was she had lost, but that didn't mean she accepted it. She wasn't the type of person to make excuses. There were many races on the void battlefield that had methods of immunizing themselves against her poison. It was her job to surpass these limitations and rise above it. Her guardians had long since told her that she had reached the threshold of mastery and pious force to move on to improving her battle prowess in other ways. However, Simona had been stubborn. She didn't just want to meet a minimum threshold. She wanted to be like her ancestors and bestow the family with an evolution, a step beyond what they had now. Due to this, despite the fact she could have begun to train up herself in other ways, she remained entirely focused on pious force. Of course, when she met those that couldn't counter her, she was unstoppable, being a genius no weaker than any of the top echelon of this generation. However, when she ran into someone like Aina, she felt like nothing more than cannon fodder. Simona slowly rose to her feet, not bothering to wipe the blood that trickled down her lovely violet-painted lips. The dot of crimson was especially striking upon her pale features, and her expression gave way to no emotion. She strolled forward, whip in one hand, sword in the other. A murderous aura surrounded her. She was going golden token hunting. One day, she would pay back this defeat. "Huh, it's a good chance," was Aina's only response. Lionel was speechless. They had only just left their battle with Simona, when Aina said that this was a good opportunity for Lionel to recruit her. Lionel almost felt like someone was pulling a prank on him, and had unearthed some hidden cameras in a few seconds. But when Aina confirmed that she was serious, he really had no idea what to say. "Why do you think I fought her instead of letting you do it?" This chapter upload first at Novelbin. Lionel raised an eyebrow. Wasn't that because she was a woman? She had said so herself. The fact she was a woman is part of the reason, yes. But I could also tell that she used poisons. It was obvious from the very beginning that would be able to defeat her easily. I have a certain sensitivity to that sort of stuff. And because she's easy to defeat. Because she'd be easy to defeat despite being such a great talent. In the event that she did lose, the resentment she held would be toward whoever defeated her, meaning me. She'll train, improve herself, and likely challenge me again. But she will still lose. When this happens continuously, and yet she realizes that I follow you, she'll birth an innate respect for you that exists outside of whatever resentment she has for me. In fact, after losing to me continuously, she might even try to find a different method of defeating me that just might include being more useful to you than I can be. Lionel's expression flickered. When this woman becomes so scheming? It didn't really seem like her at all. But soon Lionel would come to understand where this came from. She seems like a person far too prideful to take that sort of path, though. You don't understand. Aina shook her head. The pride of a man is different from the pride of a woman. They don't manifest in the same ways. Plus, there are certain things that only I can do for you. Recruiting talented women is one of those things. Your status is special. If you go around recruiting women as the future heir of the Morales family, people will misunderstand. That's why these sort of tactics are better. Why did it sound like she was just keeping tabs on the women around him? Lionel was about to respond when he frowned. Already? He could see it up ahead. The center of the lake was already in view and many groups had already surrounded it. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 1327. Published at 10th of November, 2022, 12:44 and 13 seconds p.m. Chapter 1327. Interesting. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Chapter 1327. Interesting. Several platforms hovered in a circle around the center of the lake. It was clear by the lack of variety in the paths taken to get here that many had still made the opposite choice to Lionel, instead choosing to forge their way to the center as quickly as possible. Lionel immediately felt that this was a great opportunity. Those with the least stone pathways were likely among those who believed in their abilities the least, and were, as such, easier targets. Aina was only a step or two away from wielding an amethyst token. However, Lionel suddenly thought of another possibility that made him frown. I went out of my way to always choose the more difficult path. And yet we somehow only ran into 2 groups with just enough golden tokens to place Aina on the brink of earning the next grade? Was that by coincidence? Or by design? Lionel's gaze narrowed. With how important the amethyst token was to the Void Palace, would they really allow one to so easily upgrade to it? What if these pathways had purposely led Lionel and Aina here after it deduced that they were close to a breakthrough? That lends itself to more questions than answers, though. There has to be a path toward reaching the amethyst stage. But why would it be here? The Void Palace must know that it might be even easier to gain what tokens were missing here compared to elsewhere. Unless? Lionel suddenly realized something quite obvious. There was no easy path to reach anyone here. Though they were all concentrated into a circle, the space between each platform was enormous. The circumference covered at least a few kilometers, but there were only a few dozen platforms and groups. There was no simple way to challenge them unless Lionel just flew over. But something told Lionel that there was a reason they were so spaced out. If he tried to close the distance, he would definitely end up blocked. So we aren't given an opportunity to reach the amethyst rank, and we can't challenge people anymore. What exactly is the point of this, then? This chapter upload first at NovelBin.net. If you want to read more chapters, please visit Novel.next.com to experience faster update speed at that moment. Another platform appeared within the circle, and soon another. Lionel's gaze locked onto a golden pair of irises, his eyes not shifting away. The appearance of Conan seemed to make the atmosphere several times heavier. Before this trial began, Lionel had noticed this young man before. But after the geysers started erupting and platforms started appearing, the phenomena caused the fogginess of the lake to increase manifold. The result was a clear line of sight vanishing for them all until they reached this proximity. Seeing the young man again, and at a much closer distance, Lionel could feel the hairs on his skin tingling, his body threatening to re-enter that state once again. It was the same feeling he had gotten from Simona, except multiplied several times over. Much of Simona's lethality was concentrated in her pious force, something that didn't give Lionel any pressure at all. His feeling when meeting her was more like an acknowledgement of her strength, rather than an acknowledgement of the threat she might pose. But this young man, he was different. Lionel could feel something not too dissimilar from his king's might coming from Conan. Not just that, but he felt something quite similar to Aina's berserk god lineage factor as well. He and those that followed him had wild, unrestrained auras. But they also had a lofty, imperial sort of arrogance as well. Just being in their presence felt stifling. At that moment Lionel smiled. An action that made Conan, who only wanted for murder, feel taken aback. He couldn't wrap his head around why this bastard was smiling at him. Is that son of a bitch taunting me? Unfortunately, Conan wouldn't get his answer, at least not immediately. After smiling, Lionel looked away and sat down cross-legged, taking a deep breath. Little Blackstar vanquished his wolf construct and hopped into Aina's arms as she took a seat as well. It was clear that whatever it was that was about to happen here, it wouldn't be occurring right this moment. This chapter upload first at NovelBin.net. Lionel took a deep breath, his breathing even and his mind focused. He had felt like he was on the precipice of a breakthrough not long ago. But, after his bloodthirstiness for battle vanished, it had slipped away as well. Lionel always had at least a few of his minds reading and recording what was happening to his body at any moment. Whether it was his mindset, the changes to his biochemistry, and most definitely something as important as a failed breakthrough, he kept tags on them all. Whenever he settled down, he could review these moments with absolute clarity. This was the power of the Tier 4 control stage of Lionel's ability index. When he reached a certain level of mastery, he would even be able to replay the state his body had been in during a failed breakthrough, and make some minor tweaks to ensure that he succeeded this time. Interesting, so that's what happened, from what Lionel could see. An odd and special sort of rune had tried to form but failed to in the end because it lacked appropriate stimulus. This rune seemed to have wanted to take root in Lionel's force nodal and their pathways, fusing together with his internal force and influencing his every attack. It needs me in a state where I'm wanting for blood and battle. This makes sense considering what Wise Star Order told me about the disposition of Scarlet Star Force. These runes are probably the key to fully comprehending my innate node, and likely represent fundamental portions of the natural force nodes hidden within it. These natural force nodes had been able to protect Lionel from such a large concentration of anarchic force. They weren't a joke by any stretch of the imagination. Lionel's eyes opened, his gaze sweeping over his potential opponents. They would be the whetstone he needed to cross this final barrier. At that moment, another platform appeared and Lionel's smile became wider. It seemed Conan wasn't the only one who could make his heart race. A hulking man standing at 2.5 meters tall appeared, his legs dangling from the edge of his platform, and a twin pair of enormous battle axes pierced into its sides. Important announcement below. More chapters coming. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.